He grabbed his wife by the hair, dragging her across the floor of the ballroom because his mistress had spilled wine on her own dress. His rival, a titan of industry, wrapped his arms around her and declared, "You belong to me now. Handle this however you want. If the sky falls, I will hold it up for you." Julian's eyes burned with pure fury. At the most lavish gala in New York high society, Evelyn Carter, his legal wife, was being publicly humiliated by her own husband, dragged and exposed before hundreds of judging eyes, all because of a trap set by his mistress. Just when she felt that the last shred of her dignity was about to break, a powerful man crashed through the chaos. Without a moment of hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, his deep and possessive voice sounding like a restrained roar. Before we dive deeper into this wild ride, make sure to hit that like button, share this episode, and subscribe to the channel. I absolutely love seeing how far these stories travel. Let me know in the comments what state or part of the country you are tuning in from. From that very moment, a storm of scandal and revenge was unleashed, igniting a tale of sweet retribution and a shocking shift in power that would shake the city's elite to its core. This is a high-drama story where pain, love, and power intertwine. A story you will not be able to put down. The soft, melodic notes of a string quartet filled the opulent grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. As one of the most iconic five-star establishments in Manhattan, it was the crown jewel of Hayes Global. The light from a colossal crystal chandelier fell like rain, reflecting off designer gowns, tailored tuxedos, and glasses of deep Napa Valley Cabernet, painting a scene of dazzling wealth. That night marked the 20th anniversary of Hayes Global, a monumental corporate event that had gathered the city's entire elite alongside a swarm of media outlets. Everyone wore rehearsed smiles, exchanging compliments and toasts, but beneath that gleaming surface hid a world of cold calculations and a silent, endless war for power and status. Evelyn Carter stood quietly in a secluded corner near the tall French windows. Her solitary silhouette contrasted sharply with the vibrant celebration. She wore a sapphire blue evening gown she had designed herself. The soft fabric hugged her slender figure, highlighting her porcelain skin and the delicate curve of her collarbones. Her long, dark hair was pulled back into an elegant chignon, revealing her graceful neck and diamond earrings that shimmered subtly. She was as beautiful and serene as a classic painting, and yet her clear eyes were clouded by a veil of tired resignation. She was Mrs. Hayes, the legal wife of Julian Hayes, the man at the very center of that dazzling evening. But that title was nothing more than a source of mockery and pain. In 2 years of marriage, he had not given her a single warm look. He had married her solely as a tool for revenge against her family, the Carters, whom he blamed for a corporate catastrophe that had nearly bankrupted Hayes Global years ago. Her gaze drifted almost involuntarily toward him. Julian was, in every sense, an extraordinary man. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo that emphasized his tall, powerful build. His features were sharp and sculpted, and a natural, almost regal authority emanated from his every movement. He was raising a glass with his business partners, while a striking, sensual figure dressed in bright red clung to his side. It was Chloe Vance, a rising Instagram influencer and model, and his very public mistress. He made no effort to hide it. He had shamelessly brought her to an event of this magnitude, treating Evelyn, his actual wife, as if she were nothing but air. Evelyn looked away, tightening her grip on the wine glass. She was already used to his coldness, his hurtful comments, to being treated like a lifeless, decorative object. Her presence tonight was solely to play the role of Mrs. Hayes in name only. "Well, look who is standing all by her lonesome." A sickeningly sweet voice dripping with venom whispered beside her. Evelyn did not need to turn around to know who it was. Chloe Vance had detached herself from Julian and was now gliding toward her, glass in hand, with a seductive and provoking smile painted on her lips. "Sometimes being alone is for the best," Evelyn replied coldly, wanting absolutely nothing to do with her. But Chloe stepped even closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper full of smug satisfaction. "Your dress really is beautiful. What a shame Julian has not looked at it even once. He told me that shade of blue is way too cold, just like you, absolutely boring." Evelyn's lips tightened. Her heart shrank as if an invisible hand were squeezing it. Seeing her silence, Chloe grew bolder. Her fingers brushed the diamond pendant resting on her own chest. "See this? Julian bought it for me on Fifth Avenue last week. He said that only a vibrant, fiery red like me is worthy of him." Every word was like a needle piercing Evelyn's already shattered self-esteem. She took a deep breath, fighting to maintain her composure. "Oh, really? Congratulations. Are you not jealous? Chloe laughed, a venomous glint in her eyes. Of course. You are a wife in name only. What right do you have to be jealous? Then, she pretended to trip, lunging toward Evelyn. The wine from her glass did not land on Evelyn, but directly onto her own red dress. She threw herself to the floor with a theatrical shriek, shattering the glass. Ah! Chloe's high-pitched scream instantly silenced the ballroom. The music stopped. Every eye turned toward them. Julian reacted first, moving like lightning. His face was a mask of unleashed fury. He did not even glance at Evelyn. He rushed to Chloe, pulling her up with a voice full of concern. Chloe, are you okay? Are you hurt? Chloe melted into his arms, her eyes welling with tears, the picture-perfect victim. She pointed a trembling finger at Evelyn. Julian, I just wanted to offer her a drink. I never expected her to shove me. The accusation hung in the air, completely condemning Evelyn. A murmur rippled through the room, and the stares that fell upon her were filled with disgust. Oh my God, how could she do something like that? Mrs. Hayes must be crazy with jealousy. What a cruel woman. Evelyn stood frozen, as if she had been struck by lightning. She offered no explanation. She knew it would be useless. In Julian's eyes, she would always be the guilty one. And exactly as expected, he snapped his head toward her. His dark eyes narrowed, cold and sharp as switchblades. Evelyn Carter, what kind of sick game are you playing now? I didn't do anything. Her voice trembled, but she forced herself to stand her ground. You didn't do anything. He let out an icy, mocking laugh. Chloe is on the floor and everyone saw it. You dare deny it? He gave her no chance to say another word. He marched toward her. His large hand shot out without hesitation, and in an instant, he ruthlessly tangled his fingers into her carefully styled hair. Ah! A cry of pain escaped Evelyn's lips as a burning sting ripped across her scalp. Her body pitched forward, dragged by his merciless strength. The entire ballroom fell into a dead silence. No one could believe what they were witnessing. The CEO of Hayes Global was physically assaulting his wife in the middle of his own corporate gala. Julian ignored the stunned stares. He pulled harder, forcing Evelyn to bow her head. Apologize to Chloe. Right now. Tears of humiliation streamed down Evelyn's face. She bit her lips so hard she tasted the metallic tang of blood. Her last shred of pride refused to surrender. Her silence only fueled Julian's rage. He began to drag her across the cold marble floor. The expensive fabric of her dress scraped against the broken shards of glass with a sickening sound. He pulled her right in front of Chloe and brutally forced her head downward. I said apologize. His voice was the roar of a demon. Evelyn's world was crumbling. The physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. She looked up through her tear-filled eyes. In his, she saw only pure hatred and cruelty. In that instant, she knew he was crushing the very last remnant of her dignity. Just as her knees were about to give out under his brutal force, a deep, cold voice, heavy with unquestionable authority, sliced through the suffocating silence of the room. Mr. Hayes, putting your hands on a woman. How brave of you. The voice was not loud, but it sent a shiver through the entire room. Julian froze, furrowing his brow as he turned to see who had dared to intervene. From the main entrance, a man was walking slowly toward them. He wore an impeccably tailored charcoal gray suit, and with every step, he radiated a natural, majestic presence that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. His face was sculpted perfection, defined features, a straight, elegant nose, and thin lips curved into a slight, freezing smile. But his eyes were the most striking feature, deep and dark as the midnight ocean, yet sharp and predatory like a hawk's, impossible to hold a gaze with without shuddering. Alexander Sterling. Julian spat the name through gritted teeth. A fresh wave of whispers spread through the ballroom. Alexander Sterling, CEO of Sterling Enterprises, the dominant force in tech and real estate across North America. A legend in the business world, young, brilliant, incredibly ruthless, and above all, the fiercest rival of Hayes Global. His presence there at that exact moment was absolutely shocking. Alexander seemed completely deaf to Julian and blind to the stunned crowd. His gaze was fixed from the very first second on the small, vulnerable figure trapped in Julian's grip. His heart tightened as if a hand covered in thorns had squeezed it. He kept walking without rushing. Every step seemed to land directly on Julian's last nerve. He stopped right in front of them. His silence was more intimidating than any threat. Mr. Sterling? To what do we owe this uninvited pleasure? Julian growled, refusing to let go of Evelyn's hair, an absurd display of possession. Only then did Alexander's cold gaze fall upon him, loaded with a disgust impossible to hide. He did not answer. Instead, in a gesture that left everyone breathless, he slowly unbuttoned his expensive suit jacket, leaned in, and carefully draped it over Evelyn's trembling shoulders, covering her broken and disheveled state from the eyes of the world. The warmth still lingering in the fabric and the faint scent of cedarwood cologne enveloped her, providing an unexpected sense of refuge. Then, his hand reached out. With firm calmness, he began to pry Julian's fingers out of Evelyn's hair, one by one. It was not a violent movement, but it was enough. Julian, almost by instinct, let go. Free at last, Alexander pulled Evelyn against his chest, with complete naturalness. He gently rested his chin over her shoulder, one hand protecting the back of her head, the other firmly wrapping around her waist, an attitude of absolute protection and unquestionable possession. Evelyn remained weak in his arms, still shaking from the shock. Yet, the solid warmth of his chest and his masculine scent managed to calm her in a strange way. Alexander Sterling, what is the meaning of this? Julian roared, his face twisted in fury. She is my wife. Those words hit Evelyn like a bitter reminder, snapping her back to reality. She tried to pull away, but Alexander's arms locked tighter around her. He turned his face slightly, drilling his deep eyes into Julian's. His voice was as cold as ice, and every word hit like a sledgehammer. Your wife, he scoffed. Is this how you define a wife, Mr. Hayes, dragging her by the hair and humiliating her in front of the entire city? The question left Julian speechless, his face flushed with a mix of rage and embarrassment. Before he could fire back a reply, Alexander tilted his head toward Evelyn. His lips hovered near her ear. His previously glacial voice turned surprisingly soft, though loud enough for those nearby to catch. You belong to me now. The declaration stopped time. Evelyn's head jerked up. Her eyes, still brimming with tears, widened in disbelief as she looked at him. But Alexander was not looking at her. His attention remained fixed on Julian, a silent challenge. Then he continued, his tone heavy with indulgent protection. Handle this however you want. If the sky falls, I will hold it up for you. Without sparing Julian another glance, he scooped Evelyn up into his arms. He ignored her gasp of surprise and the explosion of whispers echoing across the room. He held her firmly as he strode toward the main exit, leaving behind a Julian consumed by fury, a Chloe forgotten on the floor with a distorted expression, and a 20th anniversary corporate gala that had just evolved into an unforgettable public spectacle. The sudden shift from the suffocating air of the ballroom to the crisp night air of Manhattan, combined with the emotional trauma, was too much for Evelyn. Her strength gave out. Just before she lost consciousness, she felt the arms holding her tense up, and a deep voice, laced with worry, echoed near her ear. Evelyn. Her eyelids felt incredibly heavy. She tried to open them, but even the dim glow of a nightstand lamp made her squint. A faint antiseptic scent mixed with a clean, woodsy fragrance filled the room. This was not the cold, familiar smell of her bedroom at the Hayes estate in Long Island. She sat up slowly. She was in an unfamiliar bedroom. The decor was minimalist but luxuriously refined, featuring shades of gray and white that radiated calm and modern wealth. She was wearing an oversized men's silk dress shirt that brushed softly against her skin. Underneath, she still had on her ruined dress. The memories of the gala came crashing back. Julian's cruelty, Chloe's triumphant smile, the murmurs of the crowd, and the warm embrace of the stranger who had saved her. She looked down and finally registered the pain. Her knee, the fabric had been torn, exposing an ugly gash caused by the broken glass. The blood was already dry, but the wound looked alarming. You are awake. The deep, warm voice pulled her from her thoughts. Evelyn looked up with a start. A man was sitting in an armchair next to the bed. The lamp partially illuminated his perfectly angular face. It was Alexander Sterling. He had taken off his jacket and tie. The sleeves of his white button-down shirt were rolled up, revealing firm forearms and an expensive luxury watch. In this relaxed state, he radiated a quiet elegance, vastly different from the imposing, icy tycoon at the gala. He held a first aid kit in his hands. Beside him was a bowl of warm water and a clean cloth. Mr. Sterling, Evelyn stammered, deeply confused. She instinctively pulled the shirt tighter around her body. Where am I? Why am I here? Alexander did not answer immediately. He set the first aid kit on the nightstand and locked his eyes on the wound on her knee, a slight frown forming on his face. You passed out. I brought you to my penthouse, he said in a serene, unreadable tone. You were completely exhausted and dehydrated. You need to rest. But you will be fine. He paused briefly. However, that wound needs to be cleaned right now. Without another word, he knelt beside the bed. The gesture horrified Evelyn. Mr. Sterling. There is no need. I can do it myself, she said, trying to pull her leg back. How could a man like him do something like this for her? Do not move. His voice deepened, carrying an authority that left no room for debate. He gently took hold of her ankle. His hand was warm and steady. Evelyn froze completely, not daring to move an inch. Alexander soaked a cotton pad in antiseptic and carefully began to clean the dried blood and debris from around the gash. His movements were incredibly delicate and precise, as if he were handling a fragile, priceless artifact. That gentle care was a brutal contrast to Julian's violence. Evelyn bit her lip. She felt a lump form in her throat. How long had it been since anyone had treated her with such softness? In her 2 years as Mrs. Hayes, she had known nothing but indifference and pain. Not even when she was terribly sick had Julian shown an ounce of concern, let alone personally tended to a wound. The contrast was overwhelming. Her eyes filled with tears. This might sting a little. Hang in there, Alexander said quietly. Looking up and seeing her glossy eyes, his expression shifted ever so slightly. He did not say anything else, but his touch grew even gentler. After disinfecting the wound, he carefully applied an ointment and covered it with a sterile bandage. Throughout the entire process, he remained completely focused, not speaking a single unnecessary word. When he was done, he stood up and began packing away the supplies. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Evelyn whispered, for everything tonight. Thank you. You do not need to thank me, he replied, closing the kit and looking back at her. Between us, it is not necessary. Evelyn looked at him in total confusion. Mr. Sterling, I do not understand. I do not believe we know each other. Alexander held her gaze. Nostalgia and a faint trace of regret mixed in his eyes. He let out a soft sigh. We have met before. You just forgot. His words dropped like a stone into the quiet lake of her heart, sending ripples of utter bewilderment. She knew him? Evelyn racked her brain. But beyond the famous name of Alexander Sterling, she had absolutely no memory of the man standing in front of her. While she was lost in her thoughts, a storm of fury was raging on the other side of town. At the Hayes estate, the scene was pure chaos. Crash. An expensive glass coffee table flew against the wall following a violent kick from Julian Hayes, shattering into 1,000 pieces. His face was darker than a thunderstorm. His eyes were bloodshot, and a cold, dangerous aura radiated from him. Damn you, Alexander Sterling! He roared, grabbing a bottle of Kentucky bourbon and drinking straight from the neck. His assistant, Mr. Davis, stood nearby, physically shaking, not even daring to breathe normally. He had never seen his boss so consumed by rage. The anniversary gala had ended abruptly, and the company's stock was practically guaranteed to tank on Wall Street the next morning due to the PR nightmare. But what had truly unhinged Julian was seeing Mrs. Hayes in the arms of Alexander Sterling in front of the entire city. An unbearable public humiliation. You have 30 minutes, Julian snarled, hurling the empty bottle to the hardwood floor. Where did he take her? I want to know everything. What is the connection between Alexander Sterling and Evelyn Carter? Why the hell did he stick his nose in my business? Dig up every single detail, no matter how small. Understood? Yes. Right away. Sir. Mr. Davis felt as if he had just been handed a stay of execution. He bowed quickly and practically sprinted out, terrified of spending another second in that room. Julian remained standing amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily. The image of Alexander holding Evelyn kept looping in his mind, like a fire burning through his sanity. Evelyn Carter, the woman he had always despised, the woman he could trample whenever he pleased, had been in the arms of another man, and not just any man. Alexander Sterling, his mortal enemy. Evelyn Carter, you have a lot of nerve, he spat, clenching his fists until his knuckles turned pure white. We will see exactly how far you get without my permission. That night, Evelyn could not sleep. Lying in the massive, plush bed of the unfamiliar penthouse, she tossed and turned relentlessly. Alexander's words, "We have met before. You just forgot," echoed over and over in her mind. planting seeds of doubt and confusion. But no matter how hard she tried, she could not recall a thing. The city, draped in darkness, sprawled out beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the silent luxury of the space only magnified the emptiness inside her. She was spending the night in another man's home. By now, Julian was likely either blinded by rage or sleeping comfortably in Chloe Vance's arms, without a single care about the disappearance of his wife in name only. Thinking of Julian brought a dull ache to her chest. 2 years. 2 long years of enduring that marital hell. She remembered her wedding night as if it were yesterday. Dressed in a pristine white nightgown, she had waited for him, nervous and hopeful, in her luxury suite. But when he walked in reeking of alcohol, his first words were not of love, but made of ice. "Evelyn Carter, do not expect a damn thing from this marriage. To me, you are nothing more than a tool to get revenge on your family." From that day on, her life plunged into total darkness. He never touched her, never offered a single warm gesture. His presence at home was erratic, and every return was accompanied by sheer contempt. He humiliated her in front of the household staff, criticized her at every meal, called her a parasite, and called her family hypocrites who had used dirty Wall Street tactics against his own. She tried to explain herself, but he never listened. He only believed what he wanted to believe. Once, she fell terribly ill with a high fever. She spent days bedridden. She called him with a weak voice, hoping for at least one word of concern, but he responded with total apathy. "I am busy," and he hung up. The next day, she saw on Instagram that he had flown to Aspen for a ski weekend with Chloe Vance. In the photos, he was smiling a radiant, genuine smile. That was the day her heart completely died. Many times she had asked herself why she tolerated it all, perhaps out of a naive hope that one day he would see the truth, see her sincerity, or perhaps because of the promise she made to bail her family out of their financial ruin by accepting this arranged marriage. But what had her patience actually earned her? Public humiliation in front of hundreds of New York's elite, being dragged by her own husband like an animal, forced to apologize to the very mistress who had framed her. The memory of the previous night made her body shake, the burning pain in her scalp, the freezing marble floor, Chloe's triumphant glare, Julian's furious screaming, the looks of pity and disgust from everyone in the room. It all replayed in her mind like a slow-motion film. A hot tear slid down her temple, soaking into the pillow. Enough. It was enough. Her endurance was not infinite. Her heart, even if it had been forged from steel, had been worn down to nothing by his constant cruelty. Last night was the absolute breaking point. She could not live like this anymore. Evelyn wiped the tear away and looked out the window. On the horizon, a silver light began to break over the Manhattan skyline. A new day was dawning, and her life needed to start anew as well. A firm, brave decision took shape in her mind. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight pierced the curtains, Evelyn was already awake. She showered and put her ruined dress from the night before back on. Despite it being wrinkled, she carefully folded Alexander's dress shirt and left it neatly on the bed. Walking downstairs, she found Alexander sitting at the dining table reading the Wall Street Journal. He had changed into comfortable clothes, but he still looked incredibly sharp and relaxed. A lavish breakfast spread was set on the table. Seeing her, he put the paper down. "You are up. Come, eat breakfast." Evelyn walked over and sat across from him. She did not touch the food, simply looking at him in silence. Alexander did not push her. He poured a glass of warm milk and slid it across the table toward her. "Drink. It will make you feel better." That simple gesture woke an indescribable emotion inside her. She took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and looked him dead in the eye. "Mr. Sterling, thank you for everything. I have made a decision." Alexander set down his coffee mug and watched her silently, waiting. "I am filing for divorce." The words came out calmly, but the weight they lifted off her shoulders was massive. It felt as if a boulder she had been carrying for 2 years had finally evaporated. A profound wave of relief washed over her. Alexander showed zero surprise. His eyes remained calm, as if he had fully anticipated this outcome. He simply nodded. Good. That single, simple word was the greatest support she could have possibly received. "If you need legal counsel or any help," he added, "you only have to ask." Evelyn looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had no idea why he was being so kind to her, but she knew one thing for certain. This man was nothing like Julian Hayes. He actually respected her. "Thank you," she said, and a genuine smile finally graced her lips after a long, dark night. but this is something I have to handle myself. She had to be the one to put a definitive end to this twisted marriage to reclaim her own justice and dignity. The yellow taxi pulled up to the imposing wrought iron gates of the Hayes estate. Evelyn paid the driver and stepped out, inhaling deeply to steady her nerves. She had returned to the place she had called home for 2 years, but now it felt completely alien and suffocating. Walking into the foyer, the atmosphere was freezing. Mrs. Gable, the longtime housekeeper, saw her, and her expression twisted into a mix of pity and terror. She mumbled a quick greeting and practically fled toward the kitchen. Julian was sitting on the living room sofa, as if he had been waiting for her. He had changed into casual clothes, but his face remained dark and tense, his eyes bloodshot. An invisible pressure seemed to surround him, warning everyone to keep their distance. The crystal ashtray at his feet was overflowing with cigarette butts. It was glaringly obvious he had not slept either. Seeing her, he curled his lips into an icy smile. Well, if it isn't Mrs. Hayes, finally gracing us with her presence. I was starting to think you had permanently moved into Alexander Sterling's penthouse. Evelyn ignored the sarcasm. Before, those words would have cut her deep. She would have desperately tried to explain herself, but now, she felt absolutely nothing. I came back to pack my things, she said evenly. Pack your things. Julian let out a harsh laugh, as if he had just heard the funniest joke in the world. He stood up abruptly and closed the distance between them, blocking her path. His tall frame cast a menacing shadow over her. Evelyn Carter, who gave you permission to leave? You are my wife. Do you honestly believe you can just walk out without my consent? His voice was dripping with possessive arrogance, treating her exactly like a piece of property. Evelyn tilted her head up, holding his gaze without a drop of fear. Julian, this marriage was nothing more than a business transaction, and now I want to terminate it. Terminate it. Julian smiled with pure disdain. His hand shot forward, gripping her chin and forcing her to look up at him. What right do you have to talk about terminating anything? After spending the night with my biggest rival, you think you can just waltz out of here like nothing happened? Evelyn Carter, do you take me for an idiot? The pain in her jaw was intense. But Evelyn did not flinch. She looked at him with arctic coldness. In her eyes, there was not a single trace of weakness left, only miles of distance and disgust. Think whatever you want. Let go of me. Her defiance infuriated him even more. This woman, who had always been so submissive, now dared to look at him like this. He squeezed her jaw tighter. Do not forget that your family's company still completely depends on Hayes Global. If you dare defy me, I will bankrupt them overnight. That was his ultimate weapon, the heavy chain that had kept her tied down for 2 years. But this time, it held zero power over her. Do whatever you want, Evelyn replied coldly. I have already paid off my family's debt with 2 years of my life and my dignity. As of today, I owe absolutely nothing to anyone. With a sharp jerk, she ripped her chin out of his grasp. Julian stood paralyzed. He had never once expected her to fight back. Using that brief window of shock, Evelyn stepped back, putting distance between them. She unzipped her designer handbag and pulled out a carefully folded legal document. Without uttering a single word, she threw it directly at his chest. The crisp white pages fluttered to the floor, sliding right to the tips of his expensive leather shoes. At the very top, in bold, clear font, it read, Petition for Divorce. And on the line for the wife's signature, Evelyn Carter, signed with a firm, unwavering stroke. Julian stared at the document, his pupils contracting violently. Divorce. This woman actually had the nerve to serve him divorce papers. You dare? He snapped his head up, his eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and explosive rage. And why wouldn't I? Evelyn replied with absolute serenity. I refuse to keep being Mrs. Hayes in name only, and I want absolutely nothing to do with your family's wealth or status. Julian Hayes. I have had enough. She did not want to waste another second. She spun on her heel and marched up the grand staircase, leaving a completely bewildered man standing in the foyer. She did not have many true belongings in the Hayes mansion. The designer clothes, luxury handbags, and high-end jewelry he had purchased for optics, she had never truly touched. She packed only what was originally hers, some comfortable clothes, her college design textbooks, and a few personal items. It all fit into one small carry-on suitcase. When she came back downstairs with her luggage, Julian was standing in the exact same spot, but now he was gripping the divorce papers, having crushed them into a deformed ball. Seeing her walking toward the front door, he lunged forward to block her path. I am not signing this. That does not matter, Evelyn replied, her voice ice cold. My lawyers will file it with the court. Evelyn Carter, he roared, completely losing his grip on his temper. He could not comprehend how they had reached this point. She was supposed to be the one begging him. Why was she the one walking away? Do you really think you can survive out there after leaving me? Do you honestly believe Alexander Sterling is serious about you? Don't be so damn naive. To him, you are just another pawn to use against me. What I am to him is none of your business. Evelyn smiled with a profound, cutting contempt. You should be much more worried about your precious Chloe Vance. I am sure she needs your shoulder to cry on right about now. Without giving him a chance to fire back, she pushed past him, grabbed her suitcase handle, and walked straight out the front door. Stop right there, Evelyn Carter. Get back here. Julian's screams echoed off the marble walls behind her, but she did not slow down. She did not look back once. The mid-morning sunlight hit her face directly. It was bright, almost blinding, but undeniably warm. She took a massive, deep breath. For the first time in years, her chest felt light. She had escaped. She had finally broken out of the golden cage known as the Hayes estate. Behind her, Julian watched her figure fade down the driveway, crushing the divorce papers in his fist until his veins bulged. A totally foreign sensation washed over him. Emptiness and panic. Walking out of the Hayes estate felt like removing a lead vest. The New York sky seemed clearer, the air easier to breathe. But with freedom came uncertainty. Where would she go? What was her next move? She had not walked far down the wealthy suburban street when a black Cadillac Escalade pulled up smoothly beside her. The tinted window rolled down, revealing Alexander Sterling's calm face. Get in, he said simply. Evelyn hesitated for a split second, then nodded. She did not want to stay in that neighborhood a second longer. Alexander stepped out of the SUV, opened the trunk to load her suitcase himself, and then held the passenger door open for her. His effortless chivalry made something warm flutter in her chest. The Escalade accelerated, leaving the imposing, cold mansion in the rearview mirror. Where to? He asked as they merged onto the highway. I do not know yet. I was planning on finding a hotel for now, she answered honestly. Alexander stayed silent for a moment, keeping his eyes on the road. A hotel is not a viable long-term plan. I have a high-end luxury condo in Tribeca that is currently sitting empty. The building security is flawless, and no one will bother you there. Consider it a loan. You can move out whenever you get back on your feet. Oh, no, Mr. Sterling. I couldn't possibly. That is way too much. Evelyn quickly shook her head. She already felt like she owed this man the world. I do not like being rejected. Alexander glanced at her through the rearview mirror. His tone left absolutely zero room for argument. Besides, I am not doing this for free. Consider it a favor you owe me. I will collect on it eventually. Framed as a business transaction, it was much easier to accept. Evelyn desperately did not want to be a charity case. In that case, thank you. Alexander's condo was located in one of the most exclusive residential high-rises in the heart of downtown Manhattan. It wasn't overwhelmingly massive, just a master bedroom and an open-concept living area, but it was decorated with warm, sophisticated taste. Most importantly, it gave her an immediate sense of safety and total freedom. After carrying her suitcase inside, Alexander did not linger. He handed her a keycard and a brand new iPhone in a sealed box. My private number is pre-programmed in there. Call me if you need anything at all. And for now, do not turn on your old phone. We want to avoid anyone harassing you. His extreme level of consideration left her speechless. All she could do was thank him one more time. When Alexander left, Evelyn was finally entirely alone in her own space. She walked through the condo, gently running her fingers over the furniture. This was ground zero for her new life. Over the following days, Evelyn aggressively hit the pavement looking for a job. Holding an honors degree in jewelry design from Parsons School of Design, she was confident she could land a decent position. She quickly updated her resume and portfolio, firing them off to the top jewelry houses on Fifth Avenue and the Diamond District. As expected, her phone quickly started ringing for interviews. She was thrilled, full of hope, but reality hit like a freight train. At the first luxury brand, the HR director seemed incredibly impressed. He even told her to come back the following Monday for onboarding. But 48 hours later, she received a cold email stating the position had been filled by a more suitable candidate. The second corporate interview was even weirder. The moment she walked into the lobby, the receptionist awkwardly informed her that the interview had been canceled due to unforeseen executive decisions. At the third firm, after shaking hands, the hiring manager was visibly uncomfortable, asked 3 generic questions while refusing to make eye contact, and rushed her out the door. After 5 identical experiences, Evelyn, naive as she may have been in the past, finally connected the dots. Someone was pulling heavy strings from the shadows, and that someone could only be Julian Hayes. He was trying to corner her, starve her out, and force her to crawl back to his doorstep begging. The realization pulled a bitter laugh from her throat. Did he honestly believe that would make her break? He had severely underestimated her. That night, after a brutally long, frustrating day, Evelyn walked back into the Tribeca condo. She didn't bother turning on the lights. She just sank onto the cold hardwood floor, staring out the massive window at the glowing Manhattan skyline. A crushing wave of isolation and helplessness washed over her. She had no idea what her next move was. Then, her eyes locked onto her half-open suitcase sitting in the corner. Tucked between a few novels, the spine of an old, battered sketchbook peeked out. It was her main portfolio from her days at Parsons, the exact book where she had poured every ounce of her soul into jewelry design. From the day she married Julian, it had stayed buried at the bottom of a box, taking all her dreams down with it. An intense jolt of adrenaline shot through her veins. She stood up, marched over to the luggage, and pulled the sketchbook out with trembling hands. As she flipped through the heavy pages, the designs resurrected before her eyes. Delicate strokes, aggressive modern concepts, pure unadulterated beauty. The burning passion she thought Julian had extinguished flared back to life, burning hotter than ever before. Of course. Why was she begging corporate gatekeepers for a paycheck? Why couldn't she pave her own road? It was a moment of absolute clarity. Evelyn grabbed a graphite pencil and fresh paper, sat cross-legged at the coffee table under the warm glow of a reading lamp, and started to draw. Her first few lines were shaky, hesitant, but they rapidly smoothed out, becoming bold and decisive. Elegant sweeping curves and microscopic, intricate details began bleeding onto the blank page. She drew for hours without a single break. She completely lost track of time. She forgot how exhausted her body felt. She forgot the rejections of the day. Her entire universe narrowed down to raw gemstones, delicate gold chains, and bespoke earrings. She was building her own empire on paper, an empire that no man could ever tear down. When she put the finishing touches on a stunning teardrop-shaped diamond pendant, she held the paper up to the light. She named the piece Rebirth. A luminous, unstoppable smile broke across her face. "You can actually do this, Evelyn," she whispered to the empty room. "The climb is going to be brutal, but you are never letting anyone push you down again." For the next few days, she locked herself in the condo, completely surrendering to her art. She weaponized her frustration, turning it into pure creative fuel. Her pieces were not just aesthetically flawless, they told a story. They had a soul. But she was a realist. She knew a stack of pretty drawings wasn't a business. She needed heavy venture capital, a manufacturing studio, raw materials, industry connections, everything she currently lacked. Just as she was hitting a wall on where to secure funding, the condo buzzer rang. Opening the heavy door, she blinked in shock. It was Alexander Sterling. He was wearing a razor-sharp navy suit and holding a slim leather briefcase. The absolute picture of Wall Street dominance. "Mr. Sterling," she said, caught off guard. "What brings you to this side of town?" "I had a meeting nearby. I figured I would drop in and check on you," he said smoothly, stepping inside. His sharp eyes immediately scanned the room, locking onto the sea of sketches covering the coffee table. "I assume the corporate job hunt has hit a brick wall?" He hit the nail right on the head. Evelyn nodded, a dry smile on her lips. "It's not just hitting a wall. It's virtually impossible. Julian is already making his moves." She didn't try to sugarcoat it. She knew a man like Alexander already knew exactly what was happening in the market. Alexander didn't look surprised in the slightest. He walked over, set his briefcase down, and picked up one of her loose sheets. The Rebirth pendant. A flash of genuine, profound admiration crossed his features. "Your work has a soul," he stated flatly. "Are you seriously going to let Wall Street politics bury this kind of talent? What other play do I have?" She crossed her arms. "No brand in the city will touch my resume, and I don't have the angel investment to launch an independent label." Alexander set the drawing down and looked her dead in the eyes. His entire demeanor shifted into pure CEO mode. "What if I told you someone is ready to back you? Evelyn froze. Her heart skipped a beat. Mr. Sterling, what exactly are you proposing? I want to invest heavily in your brand. He snapped the briefcase open, pulled out a thickly bound legal contract, and slid it across the table toward her. I will provide the seed capital, secure the Manhattan studio space, acquire the equipment, and open up the supply chain you need to launch a high-end luxury label. Equity and profits will be split exactly as outlined in this agreement. You only have to worry about doing one thing: designing. His offer was like a blinding spotlight cutting through pitch-black darkness. But Evelyn quickly grounded herself. Her defensive walls went right back up. Why? She asked point blank. You are a ruthless businessman. You don't write blank checks for charity. Are you just using my brand as a proxy war to hit Julian's stock? She absolutely refused to be used as a pawn in a billionaire measuring contest. Alexander did not break eye contact. A faint, wildly confident smirk touched his lips. If I want to bleed Julian Hayes dry, I have 100 different financial levers I can pull to do it. None of them involve setting up a jewelry startup. He paused. The smirk vanished, replaced by an intensity that made her breath catch. Evelyn, my reasoning is very simple. His voice dropped an octave, striking like thunder. I don't give a damn about Julian Hayes. I believe in the genius of Evelyn Carter. Those words seeped into the cracks of her battered heart like warm honey. Someone actually believed in her. After 2 agonizing years of being called worthless, a titan of industry was betting millions on her raw talent. Her eyes glossed over. She stared down at the dense legal jargon on the contract, the text blurring together. She was torn. This was a once-in-a-lifetime golden ticket, the ultimate way to rise from the ashes and force Julian to choke on his own arrogance. But she was terrified of owing this man her life. She was terrified of blurring the lines of whatever this relationship was. As if he could read her mind, Alexander spoke up again. This is strictly a joint venture. I provide the infrastructure. You generate the intellectual property. We are equal partners. You do not owe me any personal debts. That shattered her final hesitation. He was right. It was a strategic alliance, and she desperately needed to prove to the world what she was made of. Evelyn looked up. The fear was gone, completely replaced by cold, hard determination. Deal. She grabbed a luxury pen off the table and signed the dotted line without another second of hesitation. Mr. Sterling, here is to a very lucrative partnership. Alexander smiled, looking deeply satisfied. Drop the Mr. Sterling. Call me Alexander, he said. Business partners don't need to be so formal. In that exact moment, Evelyn knew Chapter 2 of her life had officially begun. A chapter titled Retribution. Once the ink was dry, everything moved at breakneck speed. Alexander Sterling was a man who moved mountains. In less than a week, he had leased a jaw-dropping studio space in Soho. He fast-tracked the LLC registration and poached a skeleton crew of top-tier industry veterans. Her personal luxury label, Evelyn Carter Jewelry, was officially born. The next massive hurdle was locking down a master manufacturer for the bespoke, handcrafted pieces. No matter how good the CAD software was, high jewelry required the hands of a master artisan to truly come alive. I have a contact. A legendary goldsmith based up in the Hudson Valley, Alexander told her over the phone. His craftsmanship is flawless, but he is notoriously eccentric and refuses to take on just any corporate client. I am driving up there this weekend to pitch him. Do you want to ride shotgun? It was only a 2-hour drive north of the city. It was an opportunity Evelyn simply could not pass up. Absolutely. Pick me up. That Saturday, Alexander personally pulled up to her building. During the drive up the interstate, they bounced branding strategies and supply chain logistics off each other. The more they talked, the more Evelyn found herself utterly captivated by his sheer business IQ. He wasn't just a venture capitalist throwing cash at a wall. He was a brilliant visionary. The artisan's workshop was tucked away in a quiet, historic upstate town. The negotiation was a brutal success. Whether it was out of sheer respect for Alexander's reputation, or because the old man was genuinely blown away by Evelyn's portfolio, the master agreed to sign a manufacturing contract. Riding back down toward Manhattan, Evelyn finally let out a massive breath of relief. It felt like a 100-pound weight had been lifted off her chest. She had been running on fumes for the last 2 weeks, pulling all-nighters to finalize the CAD renders. Now that the logistical nightmare was solved, the crash finally caught up to her. Sunk deep into the heated leather passenger seat, watching the autumn trees blur past the window, Her eyelids grew heavy. She drifted off. Alexander glanced over at her. He instinctively eased off the gas pedal and dialed up the cabin heat. Bathed in the golden hour sunlight, her face looked incredibly peaceful and delicate. Her long eyelashes fluttered softly against her cheeks. He reached his hand out, fully intending to brush a stray strand of hair behind her ear, but stopped himself. He didn't want to wake her. Suddenly, Evelyn shifted aggressively. A thin layer of sweat broke out on her forehead, and her face twisted in distress, as if she were trapped in a brutal nightmare. Alexander's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He reached over and pressed the back of his hand against her forehead. She was burning up. "Evelyn! Evelyn, wake up!" he said urgently, shaking her shoulder gently. Her eyes fluttered open, completely unfocused. Her cheeks were flushed bright red. Her breathing was hot and ragged. "It's so hot. I feel sick," she mumbled incoherently. Deep in her fever dream, a name slipped past her lips. Leo. Leo, don't run. That single name hit Alexander like a physical blow. He froze. Leo, her closest friend back in design school. The guy he had seen her sitting with in the campus quad countless times all those years ago. His hand tensed on her shoulder. "Evelyn, your fever is spiking." He immediately snapped back into action. He slammed his foot on the gas. Instead of dropping her off at her condo, he drove the Cadillac straight to the private parking garage of his penthouse. He carried her bridal style straight to the master bedroom and immediately dialed his private concierge doctor. While the physician examined her and hooked up a saline IV with fever reducers, Alexander refused to leave the room. Watching her flushed, vulnerable face, he felt an agonizing, unexplainable ache in his chest. Once the doctor packed up and left, Alexander pulled a chair right up to the edge of the mattress. Using a cold, damp towel, he meticulously wiped the sweat from her brow. Lost in the fever haze, Evelyn started rambling again. "No, don't take it. It's my design. Please, somebody help me." Alexander's blood ran cold. "Somebody help me." Those exact words kicked open a locked door in his memory. A forgotten flashback. An autumn afternoon, 5 years ago. He was a senior finishing his MBA at Columbia, visiting the Parsons campus for a guest lecture. She was a sophomore. He was walking past the main exhibition hall when he saw her backed into a corner, arguing aggressively with another female student. They were accusing her of academic plagiarism. They were literally trying to physically rip her portfolio out of her hands. Evelyn had been on the verge of tears, totally isolated and about to break. That was the day he stepped in. He hadn't raised his voice, but using brutal, undeniable logic, he dissected the timeline of the sketches, pointed out the structural differences, and publicly annihilated the accusation, proving her absolute innocence. That afternoon, she had looked up at him with massive, tear-filled eyes, overflowing with gratitude. "Thank you," she had whispered. He had simply given her a curt nod and walked away, but he had never forgotten her, her resilience, that defiant fire in her eyes. From that day forward, he watched her from the shadows. He figured out she had a best friend named Leo. He knew she always claimed the window seat on the 3rd floor of the university library. He even knew her favorite late-night bodega run was for strawberry ice cream. He had fully planned to make a formal introduction the day she graduated. But a sudden corporate crisis within his family's empire forced him to permanently relocate to London to salvage the European division. By the time he clawed his way back to New York, she was already wearing Julian Hayes's wedding ring. So no, he had never truly forgotten her. That memory had just been buried under layers of corporate warfare and bitter regret. Alexander let out a ragged sigh. This time, he didn't hold back. He gently brushed his knuckles against her burning cheek. His face was a portrait of sorrow, deep regret, and terrifying, unshakable determination. "Evelyn," he whispered into the quiet room, "I was too late the first time. I swear to God, I will burn the city to the ground before I let Julian Hayes hurt you again." The headline that Evelyn Carter, the ex-wife of Hayes Global's CEO, had launched her own luxury jewelry label entirely bankrolled by Alexander Sterling, hit the New York elite like a financial nuclear bomb. This was no longer just a messy society divorce. This was a proxy war between billionaires. Everyone in Manhattan was holding their breath, waiting to see how Julian Hayes would retaliate. Inside the glass-walled CEO suite at Hayes Global, the temperature felt like it had dropped below freezing. Crash. A custom iPhone shattered into pieces against the mahogany wall. Julian's face was a mask of dark, violent rage. His eyes were completely bloodshot. Sitting dead center on his massive desk was the latest issue of a top Wall Street business magazine. On the cover, Evelyn standing shoulder to shoulder with Alexander at the ribbon cutting of her Soho headquarters. In the high-res photo, she was wearing a razor-sharp white power suit. Her hair fell perfectly over her shoulders. Her makeup was minimal, but she radiated an aura he had never seen in her before. Pure, undeniable confidence. Her smile wasn't forced or polite, it was blindingly real. And Alexander, standing right beside her, was looking down at her with an incredibly obvious mix of deep admiration and raw affection. They looked like an absolute powerhouse couple. That single image was a jagged knife twisting directly into Julian's massive ego. His brain simply could not process it. The woman he had kept under his boot, the woman he swore would end up begging on the sidewalk, was now glowing, building her own empire, and doing it with his most hated enemy. To him, this was 1,000 times worse than losing $1 billion government contract. It was the ultimate emasculation. "Evelyn Carter, you are playing a very dangerous game," he muttered, his voice dripping with venom. "Getting in bed with Alexander Sterling just to spit in my face." Right on cue, the heavy oak door swung open. Chloe Vance strutted in, holding 2 iced lattes. "Julian, babe, don't let your blood pressure spike over this. It's terrible for your skin," she cooed in her perfectly practiced influencer voice, setting the drinks down. "She's just a washed-up divorcee. Is she really worth getting this worked up over?" Julian let out a guttural growl, refusing to acknowledge her. Chloe glanced down at the magazine cover. A vicious flash of pure jealousy ignited in her eyes. She knew deep down that no matter how horribly Julian treated Evelyn, his ex-wife still occupied a massive amount of real estate in his head. And right now, his obsession was spiraling out of control. She slipped behind his leather executive chair, wrapping her arms around his neck, and whispered in his ear, "She's just doing this for attention, Julian. The madder you get, the more she wins. You need to remind her exactly why leaving you was the biggest mistake of her life." Julian's eyes narrowed into slits. "What are you getting at?" Chloe smiled, a cunning, nasty smirk. "She wants to play CEO? Cute. But how long do you think a shiny new startup can actually survive without industry experience or raw materials if someone applies a little market pressure?" She paused for dramatic effect. "Alexander Sterling can't hold her hand fire to you. And when her little passion project goes bankrupt, whose door do you think she'll come crying to?" Her words slid perfectly into the darkest corners of Julian's mind like a highly addictive drug. She was right. He could not just sit back and let her have a win. He had to remind the city exactly who held the real power. "You are absolutely right," he finally said, a cold, sadistic smile spreading across his face. He peeled Chloe off him, grabbed his desk phone, and hit a speed dial button. "Get the VP of procurement in here. Right now." A dirty, highly calculated corporate sabotage campaign was instantly set into motion. A few days later, Evelyn's startup slammed into its first catastrophic roadblock. The Soho studio was fully prepped. They were just waiting for the first armored truck delivery of raw gemstones to kick off manufacturing. But on the morning of the delivery, one by one, her suppliers started dropping like flies. "I am incredibly sorry, Miss Carter, but our shipment has been indefinitely delayed by customs. We have to void the contract. Apologies, but we just signed an exclusive bulk deal with a larger conglomerate. All of our top-tier inventory is locked up. Miss Carter, you really need to find another vendor. We absolutely cannot do business with you." After fielding 5 identical phone calls, Evelyn understood the grim reality. This was no coincidence. She ordered her operations manager to run a back-channel check, and the intel confirmed her worst fears. Every major gemstone wholesaler in the United States had received a heavily implied threat from Hayes Global. Anyone who shipped a single diamond to Evelyn Carter Jewelry would permanently lose the Hayes account. And in the cutthroat American jewelry market, nobody was stupid enough to declare war on a corporate behemoth just to help out a brand new startup. Evelyn slumped back in her ergonomic office chair, staring at the completely stalled production schedule on her monitors. Pure rage and total impotence warred in her chest. She never imagined Julian would stoop to literal cartel tactics. He didn't just want to beat her, he wanted to financially execute her. Without raw stones, her brilliant CAD designs were nothing but pixels on a screen. The highly anticipated launch party was effectively dead in the water. For a startup burning through venture capital, a delay like this was a fatal wound. The pressure of command crushed her lungs. As the CEO, her team's livelihoods, and Alexander's multi-million-dollar investment were solely her responsibility. Failure was not an option. She scrambled, trying everything. She cold-called boutique suppliers in Texas, private brokers in California, anything she could think of. All doors were slammed in her face. Julian's shadow covered the entire domestic market. She stayed at the office long past midnight, the city lights reflecting off the glass walls. Her brain was fried. She was entirely out of options. Just as the terrifying reality of having to surrender began to creep in, her cell phone buzzed. It was Alexander. "Are you still at the office?" His deep voice echoed through the speaker. "Yeah. Just wrapping up some logistical things," she lied, trying to keep her voice perfectly steady. She absolutely refused to dump this mess in his lap. But Alexander Sterling was not a man you could lie to. "I am downstairs in the lobby. Come down. We are getting dinner. You don't need to do that. I'm really not hungry. Come down." His tone shifted into an uncompromising command. Or, "I am coming up there to drag you out." Knowing it was a battle she couldn't win, Evelyn powered down her iMac and took the elevator to the lobby. The Escalade was idling at the curb. He didn't take her to some pretentious Michelin star trap. He drove her to a hidden, authentic little spot in the West Village that specialized in exactly the kind of comfort food she loved. He ordered for them, picking out all her favorites. During the meal, he didn't say a single word about business. He just kept putting food on her plate, telling her ridiculous stories about his early days on Wall Street, actively trying to force a smile out of her. The sheer level of emotional intelligence and consideration he showed nearly made her cry. It was only when the plates were cleared that he set his napkin down and locked eyes with her. "You don't need to stress over the supply chain embargo anymore." Evelyn's head snapped up in pure shock. "You knew? Julian Hayes operates like an arrogant frat boy," Alexander said, a lethal smirk playing on his lips. He actually thought choking off the domestic U.S. market was a checkmate. The man has zero global vision. He reached into his jacket, pulled out an iPad Pro, unlocked it, and slid it across the table. "Take a look." Evelyn picked it up. On the screen was a fully executed logistics dossier featuring elite mining syndicates and suppliers based in Belgium, South Africa, and Canada. Appended to the bottom were countersigned, legally binding exclusive contracts. The purity grades and inventory volumes blew the domestic suppliers completely out of the water. She was totally at a loss for words. "I leveraged some of my international holding companies to bypass the U.S. brokers entirely. They agreed to absolute exclusivity and slashed the tariff rates," he said casually, taking a sip of water. "If Julian wants to play dirty on American soil, we will just pivot into a multinational supply chain. Let's see if his ego is big enough to bully the European syndicates." He hadn't just solved the catastrophic bottleneck, he had weaponized it, using Julian's blockade as an excuse to instantly scale her brand to a global level. Evelyn stared at him across the table. A violent rush of emotion hit her system. It wasn't just gratitude, it was profound admiration, and something much, much deeper. Her heart started hammering against her ribs. He wasn't just throwing money at her problems, he was teaching her how to play the game at the highest level. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Diam. I don't even know how I could possibly repay you for this. I already told you. We are equal partners," he replied, his gaze dropping to her mouth before snapping back to her eyes with an intensity that made the room feel 10 degrees hotter. "And I do not let anyone threaten my business partner." He leaned across the table. Raising his hand, he brushed his thumb across the corner of her mouth, wiping away a tiny smudge of sauce. The gesture was impossibly intimate, stripping away all the corporate armor between them. His voice dropped to a gravelly, unshakable whisper. "And I also told you something else." He held her gaze, refusing to let her look away. "Whoever wants to lay a finger on you is going to have to go through me first." It was no longer just a dramatic line thrown out at a cocktail party. It was a blood oath, a real, terrifyingly protective promise. The main hall of the Javits Center in Manhattan was packed to the brim with fashion journalists, Vogue editors, and Wall Street reporters. Camera flashes fired like strobe lights. Suspended over the massive runway, the Evelyn Carter jewelry logo glowed with minimalist elegance. This was the official launch of her debut collection, Rebirth. Backstage, Evelyn took a massive, shaky breath, trying to force her heart rate back down to a normal rhythm. She was wearing a tailored ivory silk suit she had designed herself. It was sharp, elegant, absolutely flawless. She was no longer the exhausted, beaten-down trophy wife. She radiated pure, crackling electricity. "Do not let the press intimidate you." Alexander stepped out of the shadows. He had ditched the tie, looking effortlessly dangerous in a dark, unbuttoned suit. Are you ready? Just go out there and own the room. He wasn't sitting in the VIP front row. He had explicitly chosen to stay tucked away in the backstage shadows. This was her night. He refused to let his billionaire status overshadow her art. Evelyn flashed him a brilliant smile. Thank you. It was showtime. She walked out from behind the curtain. The crowd erupted into applause. Flashes blinded her for a second. She stepped up to the acrylic podium, looked out at the sea of sharks, and felt zero fear. Only raw pride and titanium determination. Good evening, New York. My name is Evelyn Carter. And tonight, it is my absolute honor to debut my first collection, Rebirth. She walked the crowd through the conceptual design. Raw, jagged stones, the brutal friction of the cutting process. The concept of agonizing pressure transforming carbon into blinding light. She spoke of hitting rock bottom, of radical transformation, of clawing your way back to your own identity. Her words were deeply authentic. The room was absolutely mesmerized. When the supermodels finally hit the runway wearing the pieces, an audible gasp rippled through the press corps. The jewelry was groundbreaking, a perfect fusion of classic Fifth Avenue elegance and aggressive modern architecture, a guaranteed smash hit. Until, without warning, the massive double doors at the back of the hall violently burst open. Julian Hayes and Chloe Vance marched into the venue. Their uninvited arrival triggered an instant media frenzy. Every single camera pivoted away from the runway and locked onto them. Julian maintained his usual arrogant posture, though his jaw was clamped tight. Chloe was clinging to his arm, her makeup immaculately applied, but her eyes were brimming with perfectly manufactured tears. The ultimate picture of a wronged victim. I apologize for the dramatic interruption. Julian's voice boomed over the crowd, cold and slicing right through the music. But we are here tonight to demand justice for Chloe. Standing at the podium, Evelyn's stomach dropped. She knew exactly why they were here. They had come to burn her to the ground on live television. Chloe unhooked herself from Julian and took 3 steps forward, her voice trembling in a masterclass of fake crying. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, I know tonight is supposed to be a massive victory for my ex-sister-in-law. I really shouldn't be here, but my legal team advised me I can no longer stay silent. She held up an iPad high above her head. On the screen was a highly detailed CAD render. The structural similarities to Evelyn's flagship Rebirth necklace were completely undeniable. This specific design, she sobbed into the microphone's thrust in her face, is a flagship piece I have been pouring my heart into for an upcoming global competition. I made the mistake of showing it to Evelyn in confidence, trusting her as a friend, just asking for her feedback. I never in a million years imagined she would steal my intellectual property and mass-produce it as her own. The accusation hit the room like a fragmentation grenade. The entire hall exploded into chaotic shouting. Plagiarism, the absolute ultimate death sentence for any designer in the fashion industry. The press mob instantly swarmed the stage. Miss Carter, are the allegations true? Did you steal Miss Vance's blueprints to launch this company? Are you facing federal copyright lawsuits? Evelyn stood dead center on the stage, absorbing the barrage of screaming reporters, the looks of intense suspicion, and the brutal judgment of the industry. She looked over the flashing cameras and locked eyes with Julian. She saw the sick, vindictive satisfaction glowing in his eyes. He thought he had just permanently destroyed her, but she was not the same woman he used to drag across the floor. She was not going to break. She took a slow, deep breath, grabbed the microphone off the stand, and her voice rang out like a gunshot over the PA system. Thank you, Miss Vance, for bringing this highly concerning allegation to everyone's attention. She stared directly down at Chloe. But before the court of public opinion decides who stole from whom, I would love to ask you one simple question on the record. You claim this design was the result of agonizing hard work. Am I to assume you spent a significant amount of time developing this concept? Chloe visibly stiffened, suddenly looking like a deer in the headlights, but she doubled down. Yes, I have been meticulously drafting this specific piece for the last 6 months. 6 months. A razor-sharp, absolutely lethal smile crept onto Evelyn's face. That is incredibly unfortunate for you. She turned to the AV technician at the side of the stage. Could you mirror my MacBook to the main projector, please? 2 seconds later, the massive LED screens behind the runway flickered. Evelyn opened a heavily encrypted folder. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, her voice was crystal clear, echoing with absolute authority. What you are looking at are high-resolution scans of my personal sketchbooks from my time at Parsons School of Design. Images began cycling rapidly on the massive screens. The very first messy graphite strokes of the rebirth necklace. The structural math. The material evolution. Pages and pages of documented progression. And stamped clearly in the corner of every single scan was a university date stamp. As you can clearly see by the institutional timestamps, she said, pointing a laser pointer at the screen. This intellectual property was conceptualized exactly 5 years ago. She clicked to the next slide. A high-res photograph filled the screen. It was a much younger Evelyn, standing on a stage at Parsons, shaking hands with the dean, holding a massive trophy. And resting around her neck was a rough, sterling silver prototype of the exact same necklace. And this, Evelyn stated, dropping the microphone back onto the stand, is the first place University Innovation Award I won for this exact design. Also, 5 years ago, the entire convention center went dead silent. The only sound was the whir of camera lenses zooming in on the screen. The evidence was bulletproof, irrefutable. The collective gaze of the media violently swung away from Evelyn and locked onto Chloe like a pack of starving wolves. The looks of suspicion instantly morphed into pure, unadulterated disgust and mockery. Chloe's spray-tanned face drained of all color, turning a sickening shade of gray. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Julian stood frozen, completely paralyzed. He had genuinely believed Chloe's lies. He never imagined Evelyn would have a literal paper trail of time-stamped receipts, ready to detonate in their faces. Evelyn looked down at them from the stage. Her voice was no longer polite. It was a public execution. Mr. Hayes, Miss Vance, would either of you care to elaborate on your 6-month design process for the press? It was a catastrophic public slaughter. They had absolutely no defense. They were trapped, utterly humiliated on a national stage. Julian grabbed Chloe by the bicep and practically dragged her out of the venue as the press corps ruthlessly mocked them, shouting questions about fraud and perjury. They became the absolute laughingstock of the New York elite in a matter of seconds. Backstage, once the house lights came up and the adrenaline finally evaporated from her bloodstream, the physical toll hit her like a truck. Evelyn collapsed into a folding chair, her legs violently shaking. Alexander stepped out of the shadows. He handed her a bottle of smart water. He didn't say a word at first. He just pulled up a chair and sat directly beside her. His dark eyes were radiating intense pride and an overwhelming tenderness. "You executed that flawlessly," he finally said. Evelyn looked at him and let out a breathless laugh. "I honestly don't think I could have stood my ground out there without you backing me." "No," he said, shaking his head slowly. "That titanium spine was always inside you. I just gave you the space to find it again." He was absolutely right. She was no longer the tragic victim suffering in silence. She was a warlord. By 6:00 a.m. the next morning, the scandal was the front-page story of every major publication in New York. Evelyn Carter annihilates plagiarism plot on live stage. Rebirth collection shocks fashion world. A masterclass in revenge. Hayes Global CEO and influencer Mistress humiliated in botched smear campaign. Evelyn Carter's name was trending everywhere, but this time, it had absolutely nothing to do with being Julian Hayes's pathetic ex-wife. She was globally recognized as a brilliant, iron-willed designer. The media circus Julian tried to use to destroy her ended up handing her millions of dollars in free global PR. Her brand went nuclear. Her inbox was flooded with massive wholesale orders from Neiman Marcus and Saks Fifth Avenue. A-list celebrities were having their publicists beg for custom red carpet pieces. The Wall Street Journal published a glowing review, calling her work fresh, incredibly sophisticated, and dangerously profound. Evelyn was sucked into a beautiful tornado of corporate warfare, bouncing between the Soho office and the manufacturing floor, approving CADs, negotiating global distribution deals, and sitting down for Forbes interviews. The hours were brutal, but she had never felt more alive. Day by day, the trauma faded, replaced by an unshakable, terrifying confidence. Her smiles were no longer polite masks. They were weapons. The darkness was gone. Her life was pure, blinding light. Meanwhile, inside the sprawling, suffocating CEO suite at Hayes Global, the atmosphere was a literal tomb. Julian was sitting at his desk, surrounded by a mountain of newspapers and glossy magazines, all featuring Evelyn on the cover. He stared obsessively at one specific photo. She was smiling, glowing with power, looking utterly untouchable. That was Evelyn Carter, the exact same woman he had written off as a boring, useless, pathetic leech. Why had he never seen this version of her? A ghost of a memory floated to the surface. A random coffee shop near NYU, years ago. She was hunched over her sketchbook, totally alive, consumed by her art. He had sneered at her, dismissing her talent as a stupid, worthless hobby. For 2 entire years, he had actively tried to crush her soul. He had systematically tried to extinguish her light. He truly believed she would be a pathetic lapdog under his control forever. He had been so incredibly, catastrophically wrong. The harder he tried to bury her, the harder she fought back. Leaving him didn't ruin her. It was the exact catalyst she needed to conquer the world. Looking at her beaming smile on the cover of Forbes, a sickening, terrifying sensation clawed its way up his throat. It wasn't rage anymore. It was pure, suffocating regret. A massive, gaping void in his chest, screaming that he had taken the most valuable thing he had ever possessed and thrown it directly into a wood chipper. He crushed the magazine in his hands, the veins in his forearms bulging against his tailored suit. He refused to accept this reality. No, Evelyn Carter belonged to him. Even if he had to drag her back to hell, even if he had to break her legs to keep her from walking away again, she was going to be his. While Evelyn's empire was rapidly expanding, and Julian was spiraling into psychotic obsession, Alexander Sterling was quietly moving chess pieces in the shadows. Because for Alexander, pulling Evelyn out of the wreckage wasn't enough. He wanted to nuke the problem at the absolute source. He wanted to uncover the dark, twisted origin of the blood feud between the Hayes and Carter families. The exact excuse Julian had weaponized to torture her for 2 years. Inside a highly exclusive, dimly lit private members club just outside Manhattan, Alexander sat across from a grizzled, sharp-eyed man sipping black coffee. It was Mr. Peterson, the most expensive and lethal private investigator on the East Coast. Mr. Sterling. This is the complete dossier on the Hayes-Carter corporate fallout from 10 years ago, the investigator said, sliding a massive, heavily redacted manila folder across the mahogany table. Alexander picked it up and started speed-reading the executive summaries. According to the narrative Julian had aggressively pushed for a decade, 10 years ago, Hayes Global and the Carter Corporation were locked in a deathmatch over a multi-billion-dollar federal real estate contract. At the 11th hour, the Carters allegedly committed corporate espionage, leaking highly classified Hayes blueprints to a third-party competitor. Hayes Global lost the government contract, taking a catastrophic financial hit. Simultaneously, their international supply chain was mysteriously crippled. The company went into freefall. Julian's father, the sitting CEO, had a massive stress-induced stroke and died shortly after. All digital forensics and paper trails pointed a smoking gun directly at the Carter family. That was the origin of Julian's psychotic vendetta. Alexander furrowed his brow. The data points looked way too clean. Way too perfect. Like a crime scene that had been scrubbed with bleach. "Did you dig up anything off the record?" Alexander asked, without taking his eyes off the file. "Yes, sir," Peterson replied, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Using your offshore resources, we managed to track down a ghost. A key executive who vanished into thin air exactly 10 years ago. Mr. Evans, the former VP of Acquisitions for Hayes Global. He was the point man on that exact federal bid." He took a sip of coffee. After the fallout, he liquidated his assets and fled to Las Vegas. He stonewalled us at first. But once we presented him with a folder containing his son's massive, unpaid mob gambling debts, he suddenly became extremely cooperative. Peterson pulled a digital audio recorder out of his coat and set it on the table. This is his full, uncoerced confession. Alexander hit the play button. A raspy, exhausted male voice crackled through the speaker. It wasn't the Carters. They didn't do a damn thing. Both families got played. The voice shook with lingering terror. It was Blackwood Corporation. Alexander's eyes narrowed into absolute daggers. 10 years ago, Blackwood Corporation was a massive private equity firm, aggressively competing against both Hayes and Carter. The recording kept playing. Blackwood operatives got leverage on me. Blackmail. They forced me to plant the digital footprint. They were the ones who leaked the federal blueprints. They sabotaged the supply chain. Their board's strategy was brilliant. Frame the Carters, trigger a blood feud, and watch Hayes and Carter nuke each other into bankruptcy, while Blackwood absorbed the market share. The man coughed heavily. And it worked perfectly. Hayes was crippled. The Carters' reputation was destroyed by the SEC. Blackwood swept the board. A few years later, they liquidated the firm, moved the billions offshore, and vanished. The absolute, brutal truth lay totally exposed on the table. Alexander clicked the recorder off. He sat perfectly still, but a Class 5 hurricane was raging behind his dark eyes. So that was it. 10 years of Julian's psychotic hatred. 2 years of Evelyn's agonizing domestic torture. All of it based on a fabricated Wall Street lie. Julian Hayes hadn't just believed a fake narrative. He had been played like a cheap fiddle by a rival hedge fund, and he had spent 2 years taking his humiliation out on a totally innocent woman. His own wife. Alexander's jaw locked. Pure, homicidal rage mixed with a crushing sorrow. Evelyn had suffered so much horrific abuse for absolutely nothing. He grabbed the dossier and the recorder and stood up. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Your offshore account will receive the wire transfer by tomorrow morning." Walking out to his waiting Escalade, Alexander sat in the back seat for a long time without telling his driver to move. He was holding a thermal detonator. This flash drive held the absolute proof that would permanently clear the Carter family name and completely shatter Julian Hayes' sanity. He had to tell Evelyn. But how? This truth was a double-edged sword. It meant that her entire arranged marriage, her daily torture, the sacrifice of her 20s to pay off a debt, was all a complete and utter farce. It had all been for absolutely nothing. He let out a heavy sigh. Regardless of the fallout, she had a fundamental right to know the truth, and when the shockwave hit, he would be standing right there to catch her. He didn't drop the bomb immediately. He knew her startup was currently strapped to a rocket ship, and she was genuinely happy for the first time in years. He refused to drag her back into the trauma ward without warning. He waited for the perfect opening. A few days later, on a crisp Sunday afternoon, he called her. "Clear your schedule for the afternoon. I am taking you somewhere." "Where?" Evelyn asked, holding her phone between her ear and shoulder while reviewing CAD renders. "It's a surprise," he replied, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. "Consider it an executive celebration for the Q1 profit margins," Evelyn agreed. The GPS didn't take them to a Michelin star restaurant. It took them straight into Greenwich Village, pulling up to the main campus of Parsons School of Design. It had been 5 years, but the campus was exactly the same. The old brick buildings, the massive oak trees dropping golden autumn leaves onto the cobblestone paths. The atmosphere was incredibly nostalgic and grounding. "Why did you bring me here?" Evelyn asked, stepping out of the SUV, totally bewildered. "I wanted to take a walk down memory lane with you," Alexander said, casually interlocking his fingers with hers. His hand was large, warm, and calloused. The sudden, intimate skin-to-skin contact sent a massive jolt of electricity straight to her brain, painting a faint blush across her cheeks. She instinctively tried to pull her hand back, but his grip tightened just enough to prevent her escape. A wildly terrifying, yet incredibly sweet sensation bloomed in her chest. They walked in silence until they passed the main university library. Alexander stopped and pointed up at a massive pane-glass window on the second floor. "You remember that spot? You used to practically live in that chair by the window." Evelyn looked up, her jaw dropping in shock. "How on earth do you know that?" It was completely true. That was her absolute favorite spot on campus to sketch. Alexander didn't answer. He just gave her that infuriatingly confident smirk. They kept walking until they hit the main exhibition hall, the exact location where her entire trajectory almost ended. "You hate this building, don't you?" he asked quietly. "I despise it," Evelyn admitted, her voice tightening. "I was publicly accused of plagiarism right on those steps during my sophomore year." "I know." She whipped her head around to stare at him. "How?" "Because I was standing right there. Time seemed to completely stop. I was the grad student who stepped in and shredded their argument." Evelyn stared at him, totally paralyzed. The foggy, half-remembered details from 5 years ago suddenly snapped into razor-sharp 4K resolution. The tall guy in the tailored coat, the deep, commanding voice systematically dismantling her bullies. That was you?" "Yeah." He nodded softly, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "I started tracking you the second I walked away from those steps." His voice dropped, vibrating with raw honesty. The insanely talented girl, the titanium spine, the eyes that refused to quit. Evelyn's heart went into overdrive. The puzzle pieces violently slammed together. "We have met before. You just forgot." They had always been orbiting each other. They walked over to a stone bench near the campus quad and sat down. The autumn wind swirled around them. "I watched you from a distance for a long time," he confessed, staring out at the falling leaves. "I figured out you loved strawberry ice cream from the bodega." I knew you chewed on your bottom lip when you were trying to solve a CAD problem. My entire game plan was to formally introduce myself the day you walked across the graduation stage. He paused, a dark shadow crossing his face. But my family's firm hit a crisis. I had to board a private jet to London that same week. By the time I touched back down at JFK, he looked at her. You had already signed Julian Hayes's marriage certificate. Evelyn couldn't breathe. Her mind was a hurricane. If she had just met him one day earlier, her entire life would have been a completely different story. No abuse. No Julian. Just him. Alexander shifted on the stone bench, turning his entire body toward her. He took both of her hands in his. His dark eyes were burning with an intensity that completely consumed her. Evelyn. His voice was gravel and velvet. I know I am dropping a nuke on you right now. I know you just clawed your way out of hell, and you might not be ready for this. But I am done waiting in the shadows. He squeezed her hands tightly. Evelyn Carter. I already lost my shot with you once. He didn't blink. I am absolutely not losing you again. Alexander's sudden, brutal honesty hit her like a shockwave. Evelyn sat completely frozen, her heart slamming against her ribs like it was trying to escape her chest. She looked deep into his eyes and saw her own reflection staring back. She didn't see the manipulative calculations of Wall Street. She saw profound respect, absolute devotion, and a silent, roaring love that had been burning for half a decade. This was the first time in her entire life a man had looked at her like this. Not for her family's name, not for corporate leverage, but for her. Just her. Her vision blurred as hot tears spilled over her eyelashes, tears of pure, overwhelming relief. She had no idea what to say. Her body trembled as a massive wave of euphoria collided with deep-seated terror. Did she actually deserve a love like this? Was it safe to tear down the titanium walls she had built around her heart? She didn't give him a definitive yes that afternoon on campus. But she didn't say no, either. Instead, she unlocked the gate. She let him pull her deeper into his orbit. They started grabbing late-night dinners, brainstorming global expansion strategies over wine, and stealing quiet moments away from the press. Slowly, without her even realizing it, something incredibly warm and unbreakable began fusing them together. Evelyn was finally experiencing a level of peace she didn't know existed. But peace in New York City never lasts long. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Evelyn walked back into her Soho headquarters after a brutal branding meeting, only to find her executive assistant pacing the lobby, looking absolutely terrified. Miss Carter, Mr. Hayes is upstairs. He bypassed security and barged into your office. He's refusing to leave. Just hearing his name instantly evaporated Evelyn's good mood. She hadn't seen or heard from him in weeks. She assumed the public humiliation at the Javits Center had finally forced him to retreat to his cave. Call building security and have him thrown out, she ordered, her voice dropping to sub-zero temperatures. I tried, but he locked the glass doors. Before Evelyn could dial 911, the heavy glass doors to her executive suite swung open. Julian stepped out. He was still wearing a custom Tom Ford suit, but he looked completely unhinged. He had lost easily 15 pounds. The bags under his eyes were bruised and purple. The untouchable, arrogant billionaire swagger was completely dead, replaced by a desperate, toxic, pathetic energy. Evelyn, we need to talk. We have absolutely nothing to say to each other, she fired back, turning on her heel to walk away. Julian practically sprinted across the lobby, cutting off her exit. He stood directly in front of her. The psychotic rage she was used to seeing in his eyes was gone, replaced by something that made her skin crawl. Desperation. Pity. Begging. Evelyn, please. I know I was completely wrong. Can you just give me one single chance to make this right? For the first time in his miserable life, the great Julian Hayes was on his knees. He had watched her build an empire. He had seen the genuine, radiant smile she aimed at Alexander Sterling. And the reality of what he had thrown away was literally eating him alive. Make this right. Evelyn let out a sharp, venomous laugh. And how exactly do you plan on executing that pivot, Julian? Are you going to wire me $1 billion to compensate for the PTSD you gave me? Are you going to verbally abuse me a few more times to balance the scales? No, he yelled, his voice cracking violently. I swear to God, Evelyn, I will treat you like a queen. I will give you half the board seats at Hayes Global. We can tear up the divorce papers. We can start over. I swear on my life, I will never hurt you again. He reached out to grab her forearms, but Evelyn violently recoiled as if he were coated in acid. Julian, do you honestly not hear how psychotic you sound? When I legally belonged to you, you treated me worse than a stray dog. Now that I am completely out of your league, you want to play the devoted husband. Do you really think I am stupid enough to buy this garbage? Evelyn, I am dead serious. I miss Carter. I did not see a meeting with Hayes Global on your itinerary today. A cold, lethal voice echoed through the lobby. Alexander Sterling stepped out of the private elevator. He walked with the terrifying calmness of an apex predator. His face was a mask of utter indifference, but his eyes were pure, absolute zero. He walked directly up to Evelyn and placed a heavy, claiming hand on her shoulder. A highly calculated display of dominance, protection, and ownership. Seeing Alexander's hand on her shoulder, Julian's dormant rage violently reignited. Back the hell off, Sterling. This is a private conversation between a husband and a wife. It has nothing to do with you. It has absolutely everything to do with me, Alexander replied, his voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. Her business is my business. He glanced down at Evelyn, instantly clocking the exhaustion, pulling at her features. His tone shifted, dropping the hostility for absolute softness. Are you tired? Go to the private lounge and decompress. I will handle the trash. Evelyn nodded, profoundly grateful. She didn't want to breathe the same air as Julian for another second. She walked past them, and the heavy doors to her private office clicked shut behind her. The lobby was instantly sucked of all oxygen. The air turned toxic, heavy, and razor-sharp. Julian Hayes. Alexander's voice was completely devoid of humanity. On what possible grounds are you demanding a reconciliation, based on the 2 years you spent psychologically torturing her? I was at war with her family. I had my reasons, Julian roared, clinging desperately to his pathetic 10-year justification. Alexander let out a dry, hacking laugh, dripping with absolute contempt. Reasons? Are you entirely sure those reasons weren't just blinding, pathetic incompetence? Before Julian could fire back, Alexander reached into his tailored jacket, pulled out his iPhone, connected it to the lobby's surround sound Bluetooth, and hit play. The terrified, crackling voice of Mr. Evans filled the Soho lobby. The ultimate truth. The Blackwood Corporation conspiracy. The fabricated Wall Street espionage. The absolute manipulation of Julian's father. Every single word hit Julian like a sniper round to the chest. His face contorted. Rage. Confusion. Absolute denial. Then, a terrifying, hollow emptiness. He physically staggered backward, his expensive shoes catching on the rug. He slammed into the receptionist's desk, barely keeping himself on his feet. No. That's a deep fake. That's corporate espionage. You manufactured that tape to break me. Alexander casually tossed a thick manila folder onto the glass coffee table. Wire transfer logs from Blackwood offshore accounts directly to the Evans Family Trust. Digital forensic reports proving the market manipulation. If you are still living in a fantasy world, I can arrange a FaceTime call with Evans right now. Julian stared down at the folder, his hands violently shaking. The routing numbers, the signatures, the dates. They were all staring right back at him, screaming the truth. He had been played. He had been an absolute, spectacular failure. The blazing hatred that had fueled his entire adult life was a complete illusion. He had aimed his artillery at the wrong target. And in doing so, he had systematically destroyed a completely innocent woman, his own wife. The flashbacks hit him like a machine gun. The screaming matches, the cold, calculated insults. The night of the anniversary gala at the plaza, dragging Evelyn by the hair across the marble floor. The look of pure, shattered agony in her eyes. His airway completely closed. He couldn't breathe. The weight of his guilt hit him with the force of a collapsing skyscraper. He stared blankly at the closed oak door of Evelyn's office. The psychotic rage in his eyes was completely extinguished, leaving behind a terrifying, bottomless void. Complete self-hatred. What the hell had he done? He had actively, gleefully destroyed the only human being who had ever actually tried to love him. The truth shattered his psyche worse than any physical beating ever could. Julian Hayes walked out of the Soho lobby looking like a walking corpse. For 48 hours, he locked himself inside his Hamptons estate. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He just drowned in Kentucky bourbon, chain-smoked cartons of cigarettes, and let the memories rip him to shreds. Evelyn cooking him dinner, even though he always threw it in the trash. Evelyn waiting up for him, even though he routinely came home reeking of Chloe's perfume. Evelyn on the floor, broken and humiliated. Every memory was a knife to the gut. By the third day, the trauma mutated into pure, unfiltered obsession. He had to fix it. He had to buy her back, no matter the cost. And he decided to execute this the only way a narcissistic billionaire knew how, with gross, overwhelming displays of wealth. Monday morning, Evelyn stepped out of her private elevator into her Soho lobby and stopped dead in her tracks. The entire floor was buried in tens of thousands of imported blue roses. From the elevator banks to the reception desk, it was a literal ocean of flowers. Suspended from the ceiling was a massive silk banner that read, "Evelyn, please forgive me." The entire startup team was whispering and taking photos. Evelyn felt a massive migraine brewing behind her eyes. Did this psychopath honestly believe this was romantic? To Evelyn, it was just another toxic, highly manipulative PR stunt. Call building maintenance and have all of this thrown in the dumpster. She ordered her security chief without missing a beat, and flag his name downstairs. Nothing with the Hayes return address is allowed past the loading dock. But Julian escalated. For the next 5 days, a relentless avalanche of ultra-luxury bribes flooded the building. Limited edition Cartier jewelry, Hermes Birkin bags with 3-year waiting lists, custom runway gowns from Paris. To 99% of the city, this was a dream come true. To Evelyn, it was a disgusting insult. He still honestly believed he could just swipe a black Amex and buy her compliance. "Return to sender," she commanded her assistant, refusing to even look inside the boxes. If they refused the return, donate it all to a domestic abuse shelter. When throwing millions of dollars at the problem failed, Julian shifted into full stalker mode. He became a ghost haunting her every move. When she walked to her favorite West Village cafe for lunch, he was sitting 3 tables away, just staring at her. When she took an Uber Black to a PR meeting, his Escalade tailed her through Manhattan traffic. Every single night, he stood in the lobby of her Tribeca high-rise holding a pathetic bouquet of flowers. "Evelyn, just give me 60 seconds. Please." She ghosted him. She put her AirPods in and walked right past him like he was a pane of glass. "I know you are furious," he begged, jogging to keep up with her heels. "Scream at me. Slap me across the face. Take a baseball bat to my car. Just do not freeze me out." His sheer desperation was suffocating. Evelyn finally slammed on the brakes, spinning around to face him on the sidewalk. Her eyes were absolute glaciers. "Mr. Hayes, are you completely unaware that this constitutes criminal harassment in the state of New York? Your sudden redemption arc is 10 years too late. And frankly, it is pathetic. Have an ounce of self-respect and walk away." She spun around and marched out the glass doors. Parked right at the curb was Alexander's black Cadillac. Alexander was sitting in the back seat, having watched the entire pathetic display through the tinted windows. He hadn't stepped out. He completely respected her autonomy to handle her own battles. But the second she slid into the leather seat, he tapped the glass divider, signaling the driver to gun it, and shot Julian a look of pure, lethal warning through the rearview mirror. Julian stood frozen on the Manhattan pavement, the expensive bouquet feeling like lead in his hands. For the absolute first time in his privileged life, a cold, terrifying panic gripped his throat. He had completely lost control of the narrative, and a horrifying reality finally dawned on him. Some bridges, once burned with napalm, can never be rebuilt. His grand, cinematic gestures weren't winning her back. They were physically repulsing her. So he pivoted again. He stopped sending the Birkin bags and just became a silent shadow. Every morning at 7:00 a.m., when Evelyn walked out of her building, Julian's car was idling across the street. He didn't approach her. He just watched her get into her Uber. Every night at 9:00 p.m., his car was still parked there. One night, during a massive nor'easter storm, she looked down from her window and saw him standing on the sidewalk, completely soaked to the bone in the freezing rain, just staring up at her penthouse. It didn't break her heart. It absolutely terrified her. She felt like she was being hunted. He even tried to bypass her perimeter by manipulating third parties. He drove to the Carter family estate to beg her parents for an intervention. But the second her father learned the truth about the Blackwood setup, he threatened to grab his shotgun and physically threw Julian off the property. He tried offering Evelyn's employees massive corporate bribes to leak her schedule. Nobody cracked. His psychotic desperation pushed him entirely off the deep end, leading straight to the final breaking point. It happened at a highly publicized charity gala for the New York Diamond District. In the middle of the keynote speech, Julian violently burst through the ballroom doors. He looked completely feral. His designer suit was wrinkled and stained. He reeked of cheap whiskey, and his eyes were bloodshot and sunken. He shoved his way through the crowd of billionaires and stopped dead in front of Evelyn's table. Evelyn. The entire ballroom went dead silent. The music stopped. Alexander, sitting immediately to her right, shot up from his chair. He stepped directly in front of her, forming a physical human shield. Mr. Hayes, you are highly intoxicated. I highly suggest you call your driver and leave before I have my security team remove you. Get the hell out of my way. Julian tried to shove Alexander. It was like trying to push a bank vault. Alexander didn't move an inch. Julian was forced to look at Evelyn over Alexander's broad shoulder. I just wanted to say, I am so sorry. His voice cracked, echoing loudly in the silent room. His broad shoulders slumped forward. A collective gasp rippled through the New York elite. The ruthless, untouchable CEO of Hayes Global was publicly begging on his knees. Evelyn sat perfectly still. Her internal rage hit critical mass. Did he honestly, truly believe this highly manipulative public spectacle was going to work? Did he think he could weaponize public pity to trap her? She pushed her chair back, stood up, walked around Alexander, and stopped inches from Julian's face. She didn't offer him a hand. She didn't look at him with an ounce of sympathy. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a low, lethal frequency that only he and the front row could hear. What exactly do you want me to say, Julian? That I forgive you? She let out a dry, hacking laugh. Do you have any concept of what my reality was for the last 2 years? Do you understand that every single time you looked at me with disgust, it felt like getting stabbed in the chest? Do you remember the anniversary gala at the plaza? When you dragged me by my scalp across broken glass in front of the entire city? Do you have any idea what it felt like to want to die just to make the humiliation stop? Her voice shook violently, but her titanium spine held firm. Where the hell was your humanity then? And now you drag yourself in here, reeking of alcohol, demanding absolution? She took a deep, jagged breath. Do you think a pathetic apology deletes the trauma? Do you think saying, I'm sorry, turns back the clock? She shook her head slowly, her eyes burning with pure ice. It doesn't, Julian. It never will. Every single word was a hollow-point bullet. Julian stared at her, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had no defense. He knew the absolute truth. He had inflicted irreversible damage. That public execution was the kill shot. The absolute last shred of Julian's massive ego evaporated into thin air. He completely shattered. He stopped trying to win her back. He retreated to his penthouse, locked the doors, and sank into a suicidal cocktail of vodka and absolute isolation. 3 days later, during a massive midnight thunderstorm, Julian was driving his sports car completely blackout drunk, speeding blindly through the slick Manhattan streets with zero destination in mind. Driven purely by subconscious obsession, he ended up in Tribeca. He slammed on the brakes outside Evelyn's luxury high-rise, staring up at the warm yellow light glowing in her window. His chest felt like it was being ripped open with a crowbar. He threw the car into drive, intending to speed away, but in his severe state of intoxication, his foot slipped. He slammed the accelerator to the floorboard instead of the brake. The sports car launched over the curb and violently slammed head-on into a massive concrete planter and an oak tree. The sickening crunch of twisting metal and shattering glass echoed up the skyscraper. Evelyn, who was just pulling the covers back to go to sleep, froze. A split second later, her iPhone started ringing. It was Alexander. Evelyn, stay in your apartment, he ordered, his voice clipped and urgent. Julian just wrapped his car around a tree outside your lobby. I am 2 blocks away. I am handling it. Her heart seized. A car crash. Despite every horrific thing he had done to her, she didn't actually want the man to die. She walked out onto her private balcony and looked down at the street. The front end of the luxury sports car was completely caved in, smoking in the rain. Minutes later, FDNY sirens wailed down the avenue, followed instantly by Alexander's Escalade. She watched from 30 stories up as Alexander took absolute command of the chaotic scene, coordinating with the paramedics as they ripped the door off the hinges and pulled a bloodied, unconscious Julian from the wreckage. Once the ambulance sped off toward Mount Sinai Hospital, Alexander called her back. He is alive. A mild concussion and a few broken ribs, but his blood alcohol level is through the roof. Go back to sleep. The threat is neutralized. Evelyn stood by the cold glass window for a long time, her brain spiraling. Was this just another extreme manipulation tactic? A literal suicide attempt just to force her to feel pity? She was so incredibly, deeply exhausted. This entire toxic cycle had to be permanently severed. The next afternoon, intel hit the wire that Julian had checked himself out of the hospital AMA and was back at the Hayes estate in Long Island. Evelyn called her driver. She was going to see him. One absolute, final time. The Hayes mansion no longer felt like an imposing billionaire fortress. It felt like a massive, empty mausoleum. Mrs. Gable escorted her upstairs in complete, terrifying silence. Julian was lying in the master bed, his torso heavily bandaged, his face pale and battered. When he saw her standing in the doorway, a desperate, psychotic spark of hope flared in his bloodshot eyes. "Evelyn, you came." She didn't step foot inside the bedroom. She stayed planted in the doorway. "I did not come here to check on you. I came here to draw a permanent line in the sand." The desperate spark in his eyes instantly died. "Julian, your twisted games end today. Seeing you wrap your car around a tree doesn't make me feel pity. It makes me feel absolute disgust." She took a deep breath, her words surgical and lethal. "Whatever physical pain you are feeling right now is absolutely nothing compared to the psychological hell I survived for 2 years under your roof. Do you honestly believe you have earned the right to play the victim?" Julian lay frozen, utterly speechless. "Your guilt doesn't fix anything," she continued, her voice radiating absolute zero. "It just forces me to constantly relive the nightmare I am desperately trying to outrun. There is absolutely nothing left between us except pure, unadulterated hatred." She looked him dead in the eyes and delivered the fatal blow. "So, if you actually feel a single ounce of remorse for what you did to me, do one final thing. Let me go. Erase yourself from my life, and never, ever come near me again." She turned around and walked down the grand staircase without looking back a single time. Julian lay trapped in the massive bed, watching the empty doorway. He desperately wanted to scream her name, to beg her to come back, but his throat was sealed shut. He knew with absolute certainty that she was right. He had permanently lost her. A single, scalding tear broke loose and slid down his bruised face. When Evelyn walked out the front doors of the Hayes estate, she felt entirely hollowed out. Alexander's black Escalade was idling in the circular driveway. He stepped out of the vehicle, walked toward her, and simply opened his arms. Evelyn couldn't hold it back anymore. She ran to him, crashing into his chest and burying her face in his suit jacket. Her entire body shook with violent sobs. The 2-year nightmare was officially, permanently over. Finally, Alexander wrapped his arms around her tightly, burying his face in her hair. He didn't ask her what happened. He just held her together. And in that heavy, protective silence, he made a silent vow that she would never face the dark alone ever again. After the devastating plagiarism scandal, Chloe Vance's influencer career was completely incinerated. Brand sponsorships were permanently canceled. Modeling agencies dropped her off their rosters. She went from an A-list NYC socialite to a radioactive pariah overnight. But the thing that was actually driving her to the brink of insanity was Julian's absolute indifference. He had discarded her like a piece of actual trash. His entire obsessive focus had been on Evelyn. Left to rot in isolation, her bitterness mutated into a psychotic, violent rage, jealousy, fury, and absolute desperation. If Chloe couldn't have the billionaire lifestyle, Evelyn wasn't going to get her happy ending either. She knew she couldn't attack Evelyn physically on the street. Alexander's private security detail was tighter than the Secret Service. But she could absolutely destroy the one thing Evelyn valued most: her face and her brand. 3 weeks later, the Manhattan Business Association hosted a massive black-tie charity auction at the Waldorf Astoria. Evelyn Carter Jewelry had been aggressively heavily promoted as the marquee donor. Evelyn had spent weeks crafting a bespoke, one-of-one diamond and ruby necklace dubbed Phoenix Fire. It was her magnum opus, and to Chloe, it was the perfect tactical opening. Evelyn was seated in the VIP front row, right next to Alexander. She looked serene, unbothered, and absolutely radiant. When the auctioneer finally presented the Phoenix Fire necklace under the spotlights, the entire ballroom erupted in gasps of admiration. Then, all hell broke loose. A figure dressed in a stolen catering uniform violently shoved their way past the velvet ropes and charged the main stage. In their hand, they were gripping a glass mason jar filled with a thick, clear liquid. "Evelyn Carter," the psychotic voice screamed. "You ruined my life. I am going to melt your face off." The attacker lunged toward the stage, rearing back to hurl the jar directly at Evelyn in the front row. The crowd erupted into terrified screams, but the attacker didn't even make it 2 feet. 2 massive men from Alexander's private security detail materialized out of thin air, tackling the attacker directly into the marble floor, with bone-shattering force. The glass jar flew out of their hand, smashing against the stage steps. The clear liquid splashed across the polished marble, instantly violently bubbling and eating a hole straight through the stone. Industrial-grade acid. The horrific, burning chemical smell instantly flooded the ballroom. Total chaos erupted. Alexander had already moved. The second the shouting started, he had violently grabbed Evelyn, thrown her to the floor behind their heavy banquet table, and covered her entire body with his own, ready to take the splash damage. His dark eyes were burning with pure, calculated murder. He had anticipated that Chloe was unhinged enough to try something, and he had placed undercover operatives at every single exit, but he never expected a literal acid attack. The NYPD tactical units breached the ballroom in under 3 minutes. With Alexander's security team handing over high-res surveillance footage, digital wire transfers to black market chemical dealers, and a full confession from the attacker, the hammer came down instantly. Chloe Vance, who was hiding in the valet parking garage waiting for the aftermath, was dragged out in handcuffs, screaming hysterically. "No! I didn't do it! Julian! Call my lawyer! Julian!" She was shoved into the back of an NYPD cruiser. Facing 20 years in federal prison for attempted grievous bodily harm and domestic terrorism, her future was permanently erased. Following Evelyn's final rejection and his near-fatal car crash, Julian Hayes completely mentally collapsed. He abandoned his corner office, totally checked out of his board meetings, and vanished into a heavily fortified penthouse, drowning in a sea of vodka and self-hatred. But a multi-billion-dollar Wall Street empire cannot survive without an apex predator at the helm. Hayes Global began to bleed out. Stock prices plummeted by 30%. Massive federal contracts were abruptly canceled. The entire corporate infrastructure was buckling under the weight of terrible PR and a ghost CEO. Alexander Sterling knew this was the exact moment to drop the guillotine. He didn't execute the kill shot in the shadows. He did it in broad daylight, in front of the entire world. During a highly publicized quarterly earnings press conference for Sterling Enterprises, a Bloomberg reporter asked Alexander a pointed question regarding the rising trend of unethical corporate warfare in the tech sector. Alexander adjusted the microphones on the podium and stared dead into the camera. Sterling Enterprises operates on the fundamental belief of a transparent, regulated free market. We absolutely condemn monopolistic blackmail and illegal corporate espionage. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. And to prove our commitment to the SEC, my legal team has just unsealed a massive cache of data. The massive LED screens behind him lit up, redacted offshore bank records, wiretapped audio transcripts, forged federal bids, and highly illegal market manipulation reports. Absolutely bulletproof, irrefutable evidence. Every single illegal tactic Julian Hayes had authorized to destroy his rivals and torture his wife was put on public display. Bribes, stock manipulation, perjury, and extortion. We are not releasing this data to launch a targeted attack on a specific individual, Alexander concluded, his voice smooth and lethal. We are doing this to uphold the integrity of the American market. It was a fatal, surgical decapitation. The news cycle went supernova. Within hours, the SEC and the FBI raided the Hayes Global headquarters in Manhattan. Major banks froze their credit lines. Board members initiated emergency votes to oust Julian, but it was way too late. The ship was already at the bottom of the ocean. Evelyn watched the CNN breaking news alert on the flat screen in her Soho office. She didn't pump her fist. She didn't pop champagne. She just let out a massive, soul-cleansing exhale. It was finally, truly over. She picked up her iPhone and dialed Alexander's private number. "Alexander, I'm watching the news," she said, her voice soft. "Thank you." 2 simple words holding the weight of the world. "You never have to thank me, Evelyn," his deep voice rumbled through the speaker. "He is just paying the invoice for the damage he caused." Hayes Global officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 2 weeks later. The sprawling Hamptons estate was seized by federal auditors. Julian Hayes lost his billions, his power, and his reputation. He ended up totally isolated, entirely broke, living in a cramped, depressing walk-up apartment in Queens, keeping company only with cheap liquor and the crushing weight of his catastrophic mistakes. But there was one final loose end. Late one Friday evening, as Evelyn and Alexander were walking out of her Soho headquarters heading to his Escalade, they saw him. Julian was standing on the opposite side of the rainy street. He was dangerously thin, wearing a faded coat, his eyes totally dead and hollow. He was no longer a Wall Street titan. He was just a broken ghost. Alexander instantly stepped in front of Evelyn, his jaw locking tight, ready to signal his security team. But Evelyn placed a gentle hand on his chest. "Let me handle this." She knew this was the absolute final page of the book. She stepped off the curb and crossed the wet asphalt, stopping 5 feet in front of him. Julian opened his mouth to speak, but his vocal cords failed him. He just stared at her. She was still breathtakingly beautiful. But now she was armored, untouchable, and radiating power. Looking into her eyes, he searched desperately for something: anger, hatred, fear, love, but he found absolutely nothing, only miles and miles of empty distance. "I lost everything," he finally choked out, his voice cracking. "And I know I deserve every second of this." He took a shaky breath, looking at her with total devastation. "I am not here to beg for your forgiveness. I know that's impossible. I just need to know one thing." He gathered whatever pathetic ounce of strength he had left. It was his final, desperate bid for closure. A tiny scrap of validation to take to his grave. During those 2 years, was there ever a single moment, even just one split second, where you actually loved me? Evelyn stared at him. She felt zero pity. She only felt a profound sadness for the 2 years of her 20s that she had burned at the altar of this man's ego. There had been agonizing effort. There had been desperate, naive hope, but there had never, ever been love. Only survival, duty, and endurance. She held his broken gaze and delivered the unvarnished truth. Never. One single word, delivered with zero malice, that completely incinerated whatever microscopic shred of humanity Julian had left. Julian stared at her. A horrific, hollow laugh ripped out of his throat. "I see." He turned around, his shoulders completely hunched, and shuffled away down the dark, rainy Manhattan sidewalk, disappearing into the crowd like a piece of trash blowing in the wind. Evelyn watched him fade into the shadows. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She wasn't crying for him. She was crying for the scared, abused girl she used to be, mourning the past that was finally permanently buried. She wiped the tear away, spun on her heel, and walked back under the streetlights toward the Escalade, where Alexander was waiting for her. He didn't ask her what was said. He didn't demand an explanation. He just wrapped his heavy trench coat around her shoulders and pulled her tightly against his chest. And in that exact second, breathing in the scent of cedarwood and rain, Evelyn knew she was finally home. With the toxic shadow of Julian permanently erased from the map, Evelyn felt completely reborn. Her dynamic with Alexander smoothly transitioned from a fierce corporate alliance into a deep, unshakable romance, built on a foundation of massive mutual respect and profound understanding. A few months later, Alexander decided it was time to pull the trigger. "Clear your schedule this weekend. I am taking you to Connecticut for dinner," he said casually one night while they were reviewing spreadsheets on his penthouse sofa. Evelyn froze, her stylus hovering over her iPad. "Connecticut? To the family estate? To meet your parents? Alexander, isn't it way too fast? What if they hate me?" The heavy baggage of her divorced status and the massive public scandals still weighed heavily on her anxiety. Alexander gently took the iPad out of her hands and interlaced his fingers with hers. "Do not spiral. My parents are incredibly grounded people." His dark eyes flashed with an arrogant, unyielding certainty. "Besides, nobody on this planet has the right to reject the woman I have chosen to spend my life with." That overwhelming certainty gave her the courage to get in the car. The Sterling family estate was not some gaudy, gold-plated monstrosity. It was a stunning, historic, ivy-covered stone manor nestled deep in the Connecticut countryside. It radiated a quiet, refined, old-money calm that was the exact polar opposite of the freezing, hostile environment of the Hayes mansion. Before Alexander could even knock, the heavy oak door swung open, revealing a highly energetic young woman who shared Alexander's sharp cheekbones. "Oh my God, you must be Evelyn. I am Amelia, his younger sister. I have been dying to meet you." She practically tackled Evelyn in a massive, warm hug. His parents were just as incredibly welcoming. Alexander's father, the retired chairman of Sterling Enterprises, had an imposing physical presence but a remarkably kind, intelligent gaze. His mother was the epitome of East Coast elegance, projecting total serenity. She immediately took both of Evelyn's hands in hers. "Evelyn, sweetheart, Alexander talks about you constantly. I must say, you are even more stunning in person." The private catered dinner was incredibly warm and full of laughter. Nobody brought up the messy tabloids. Nobody uttered the name Julian Hayes. They asked her deeply engaging questions about her design process, her global supply chain, and treated her exactly like she was already blood family. After dessert, Mrs. Sterling asked Evelyn to join her for a walk through the massive estate greenhouse. Sweetheart, I know you were terrified to come here tonight, the older woman said softly, stopping to admire a rare orchid. But I need you to know something. Your past absolutely does not define your value. Your character is measured by how you dragged yourself out of the fire. I read the Wall Street Journal pieces. I admire your genius and your titanium backbone. She turned her head, looking through the glass panes at Alexander, who was arguing with his dad on the patio. My son has always been a fortress. Cold, calculating, obsessed with the boardroom. I have never, in 30 years, seen him look at a human being the way he looks at you. He finally found the woman he wants to go to war for. She reached out and squeezed Evelyn's hand. Take care of my boy. Those soft, profound words completely obliterated the last remaining ounce of fear in Evelyn's heart. Her eyes welled with happy tears. I promise you, I will. Thank you. Riding back to Manhattan in the back of the Escalade, Alexander held her hand against his thigh. See? I told you there was nothing to panic about. Evelyn leaned over and rested her head heavily against his broad shoulder. Her heart was beating in perfect, rhythmic peace. She had finally found her sanctuary, her true family. That night, back at her Tribeca condo, Alexander didn't call his driver to leave. They were sitting out on her private balcony, a bottle of expensive Cabernet open between them, watching the chaotic, beautiful grid of the Manhattan skyline pulse with light. Evelyn took a deep breath, breaking the comfortable silence. She turned to him. Her eyes were burning with a new, terrifying certainty. Alexander, yeah? He responded, his pulse suddenly spiking. She inhaled the cool night air. Alexander Sterling, I accept your proposal. The words hit him like a freight train. He stared at her, completely stunned into silence. Evelyn smiled. A massive, radiant, shadow-free smile. She reached up and placed her hand flat against his warm cheek. I thought about it for a long time. I absolutely refuse to lose a man like you. I want to be brave enough to actually fall in love and let myself be loved for the rest of my life. The sheer wave of emotion completely short-circuited his brain. He didn't say a single word. He leaned forward and crashed his lips onto hers. It was a desperate, deep, bone-melting kiss, packed with 5 years of waiting, longing, and absolute devotion. Evelyn wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, pulling him closer. Inside that kiss, she found the ultimate security, an impenetrable shield, and the absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, he rested his forehead against hers. Evelyn, he whispered, his voice shaking. Thank you, she murmured against his lips. Thank you for finding me, for betting millions on me, and for refusing to ever back down. That night, for the first time in her adult life, Evelyn slept in total, uninterrupted peace. No nightmares of broken glass or screaming matches. Just a warm, heavy blanket of security, wrapped in the arms of the man who held her universe together. To celebrate sealing their corporate and romantic partnership, Alexander orchestrated a massive surprise. Pack your bags. We are going off the grid, he announced one Friday morning, dropping 2 first-class plane tickets onto her design desk. Destination: Maui, Hawaii, the exact tropical paradise she had kept pinned to her vision board since college. They flew private and landed in a world of lush green mountains, endless white sand, and the deep, crashing blue of the Pacific Ocean. They stayed in a wildly expensive, completely isolated cliffside villa. They drove a vintage Jeep up the winding coastal highways, hiked to hidden waterfalls, and swam in the ocean. Alexander completely shut off his CEO persona. He didn't check the stock market once. He was deeply present, constantly making her laugh, taking terrible, blurry photos of her on the beach, and buying her ridiculous souvenirs from local surf shacks. Evelyn laughed so hard her ribs ached. She felt entirely free, as light as a teenager. The heavy, suffocating trauma of New York completely evaporated into the salt air. On their final evening, he chartered a private yacht to take them out for the legendary Hawaiian sunset. The massive sky exploded into violent shades of blood orange, neon pink, and deep purple. The ocean looked like liquid gold. The entire world seemed to pause just for them. Evelyn leaned back against his chest, feeling the rumble of the boat's engine. Alexander, I honestly feel like I am in a coma and dreaming all of this. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against him. It is not a dream. This is your reality now. And I swear to God, every single day for the rest of our lives, is going to look exactly like this. When the sun fully dipped below the horizon, he led her to the bow of the yacht. A private chef had set up a candlelit table under the stars, completely surrounded by white tropical flowers, while a local acoustic guitarist played softly in the background. Evelyn was overwhelmed with emotion. After they finished their champagne, Alexander took her hand and led her to the absolute edge of the deck, overlooking the pitch-black ocean. Evelyn. His voice dropped, losing its usual arrogant swagger, suddenly thick with raw vulnerability. He reached into the pocket of his linen trousers, pulled out a small, black velvet box, and snapped it open. Inside sat the most breathtaking, flawless diamond ring she had ever seen. But it wasn't the carat size that made her gasp and cover her mouth in shock. It was the custom platinum setting. It was an exact replica of a sketch she had drawn 5 years ago in the Parsons library. A tiny, intricate seedling violently breaking through jagged rock, the ultimate symbol of rebirth. "I memorized that sketch the day you drew it," he said, his voice barely a whisper over the crashing waves. "I knew it wasn't just a jewelry design. It was a self-portrait. You are the seedling. Unbreakable. Brilliant. Constantly fighting your way out of the dark to find the sun." The billionaire CEO of Sterling Enterprises dropped down onto one knee on the wooden deck. "Evelyn, I am not a man who is good at giving flowery speeches. I only know cold, hard facts. And the absolute truth is that meeting you was the single greatest return on investment of my entire life. Watching you smile is my only metric for success. I want to spend the next 80 years destroying anyone who tries to hurt you, and building an empire with you." He held the blinding ring up to the moonlight. "Evelyn Carter, will you marry me? You don't ever have to worry about holding up the sky again. I will carry the weight for you." Tears streamed uncontrollably down her cheeks. She couldn't form a coherent sentence. She just nodded her head violently, over and over again. Alexander stood up and slid the custom platinum band onto her left ring finger. It was a flawless, mathematically perfect fit. He grabbed her by the waist and spun her around under the massive Hawaiian night sky. "I love you, Evelyn. I love you too, Alexander." 6 months later, the undisputed wedding of the decade shut down Fifth Avenue. Evelyn walked down the massive, echoing aisle of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Midtown Manhattan. She was wearing a jaw-dropping, custom haute couture gown she had spent hundreds of hours designing herself. The entire cathedral was overflowing with thousands of white roses. She was no longer the broken, humiliated girl bleeding on a marble floor. She was a titan in her own right, a radiant, untouchable bride marching straight toward her empire. Alexander was waiting for her at the altar, looking devastatingly handsome in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo. He refused to look away from her, his dark eyes radiating absolute, consuming devotion. Standing in front of the bishop and 500 of the most powerful people in America, they exchanged their vows. "I absolutely do," he said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "I do," she replied, a brilliant tear tracking down her cheek. They exchanged rings. The bishop pronounced them husband and wife, and Alexander pulled her in for a cinematic, breath-stealing kiss. The cathedral erupted into deafening applause and cheering. At that exact same second, miles away in a dark, sticky, forgotten dive bar deep in the boroughs of Queens, Julian Hayes sat totally alone on a ripped vinyl stool, surrounded by empty shot glasses. High above the bar, the flat-screen TV was broadcasting the celebrity wedding live on a local news channel. He stared blankly at the screen. He saw Evelyn, glowing with a happiness he could never comprehend, wrapped safely in the arms of a better man. The sheer wattage of her smile acted like a blowtorch to his already mutilated soul. He had really, truly lost her. Forever. He slowly raised a shot glass of cheap well liquor to the screen in a pathetic, silent toast. But no amount of alcohol could drown the crushing, suffocating weight of his permanent regret. That was his ultimate, inescapable life sentence. Later that night, far away from the cameras and the crowds, Alexander Sterling swept his wife into his arms and carried her over the threshold of their massive, multi-level Tribeca penthouse. He laid her down incredibly gently on the center of the master bed, which was completely covered in white rose petals. "Mrs. Sterling," he whispered, leaning his body weight over her and resting his forehead against hers. "I eagerly await your executive orders." Evelyn let out a rich, throaty laugh, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck and pulling him flush against her chest. "And I await yours, Mr. Sterling." He looked incredibly deeply into her eyes, the Wall Street armor completely stripped away, leaving nothing but the raw, beating heart of the man who had loved her from the shadows for 5 years. His voice was laced with an absolute, religious sincerity. "Thank you," he whispered against her skin. "Thank you for trusting me enough to let me love you." The sun that finally breaks through the clouds after a brutal, violent hurricane is always the warmest and undeniably the brightest.